This is going to be another episode of Snake and Banter, and we have a return guest for this one, because it is, of course, Anders Blume. Here's the question I have for you, Anders, is even though, you know my style, like I do it fairly off the cuff, I haven't like planned all of this out, even though people do think I am on some like next level, like 15-dimension Jenga, etc. But I do think one thing Richard taught me about esports is you should actually sort of like self-brand wherever possible. Like, you know, when we used to do By the Numbers, he used to do that like tagline where he would go like, the quintessential Counter-Strike podcast. And at the time, I would just go like, whatever that is. But I realised over time, that's actually pretty smart branding, though, because one, it gets in the brain of people that you are like, you know, the podcast to watch or whatever. But also over time, you know, it sort of like adds like a sort of like a status to the thing, you know. It's not just like, you know, off the cuff or whatever. So my question for you is this: why have you never embraced a brand? Because you could have gone with all those ones people suggested over the years. You know, the voice of Counter-Strike, you know, the OG caster or something. You could do something like that as your brand, right?
Yeah, I thought about it. The only problem that I have with it is this is just like the Danish personality thing. I just think it's so cringe to like lift yourself up as like the voice of Counter-Strike. I just hate the idea of doing that kind of thing. But I think you are right essentially. Like I just ended up branding myself as the person who has, you know, who does the post crazy shit on Twitter and just, you know, like has wicked ideas, I guess. But that's it. Like I just didn't. You're right. You're absolutely right. I should have done that in retrospect. If I could time travel back, yes, it would have been smart to do that. You know?
I appreciate that your attempt at branding is actually all the parts of your persona that everyone in the industry thinks you should do, like wake up and just post an actual shower thought that you just had about like some insane like like Hellraiser-esque scenario that you want to happen in reality or something. Okay, fair enough. Okay.
yeah. No, but I mean, you're right. I don't know. I thought about it since, but then it doesn't feel natural to me. I would feel bad if I had to introduce myself every time as like, this is the voice of Counter-Strike. I hate it.
Well, you know what, Anders? It is important to feel comfortable. Speaking of which, MeUndies, it's www.meundies.com/snake. Lounge season is officially upon us, and MeUndies, your favourite company, bit presumptuous, but okay, I'm reading the copy out, don't worry. Your favourite company that makes the most comfortable underwear in the world also makes the coziest loungewear that's perfect for the holiday season, or in this case, the major season. From lounge pants to hoodies, sweats, and onesies, it's not just underwear. MeUndies is here to remind you that it's never too early to start thinking about gift ideas. What could be better than the gift of comfort from MeUndies, which actually, by the way, is underrated. People might think the idea of like buying some underwear is silly. Well, one, they have all other types of clothing. And then secondly, that actually is underrated. If someone did buy me some clothing, yeah, initially you might just go, what the hell, Grandma? That's not a Super Nintendo Entertainment System. But part of me also later, when I was enjoying the comfort, would think, that's nice. I do like to have comfortable clothing. I don't want to have tacky stuff, do I? And that's the thing. Kick off the lounge season with MeUndies and get 20% off your first order, plus free shipping at meundies.com/snake. Our code is SNAKE. You can spell that out. Obviously, it's in the name of the show. Enter the promo code SNAKE. That's meundies.com/snake. Code SNAKE for 20%, plus free shipping. MeUndies, comfort from the inside out. By the way, they have like a million different styles of types of underwear and stuff. As I said, it's not just underwear. They've got all versatile loungewear and everything else. They've got joggers, hoodies, onesies. Also, it's very comfortable. It's got the special micro-modal fabric. It's breathable, stretchy, and as they say, also comfy, making it ideal for all-day wear. And it's responsibly sourced if that's something you care about. So again, just check out meundies.com/snake. Thank you to MeUndies, and thank you to any of our fans who make themselves comfortable and take advantage of the great deals and products we bring to you on this show. Right, now then, let's get into the episode. So Anders, where are we starting here? What is the good point for today? Obviously, there's a lot of big topics in the world. What's on your mind at the moment?
I think the thing that I'm really excited about and looking forward to is the fact that we're finally going to be in a place in the ecosystem where, you know, whatever tournaments or especially leagues, I don't know how many are going to exist next year, but they're not going to be poisoned by the partnered situation anymore. Okay. Like when I look back and I think about especially CSGO and how many different leagues we had where partnered teams kept fielding terrible lineups, and when you have that kind of structure where you're like playing almost every team in the tournament, if there are like even like 2 or 3 bad teams, it means almost every game at the beginning is ruined for such a long time. And there's no story even. Like if you field a bad team, at least the story could be, oh wow, this is exciting. They're going to get knocked out. Like they might not return next season or whatever. But with the partner stuff, you know they're going to return next season. It doesn't matter if they've been bad for 7 years in a row. Like they're still, you know, that you're still going to have to see you know, NIP or Big or EG, like, you know, just to name a couple that are on my hit list at the moment. And it's just, obviously they're not trying to play bad Counter-Strike, but the problem just is, at least I want the story of saying, wow, now they're in hell. Like, now they have to re-qualify for the tournament altogether or whatever. Like, that's exciting. That's cool. But especially as a caster, it's the worst thing in the world when you have to show up and you have to sort of almost feign excitement at the fact that now they have a new lineup and you don't really know where it's going. So for me, I'm excited about that. I think it's a good thing, and I just look forward to that world.
I feel like the tournament organizers have to be pretty happy about this one. One, they don't have to have media partnership deals necessarily. They're going to have some programs with certain orgs when, like, I don't know if people have seen the frequent flyer blast program, where if a team that's in the high ranking points always accepts every tournament invite from Blast, they're going to get a certain amount of money, or like a basic, it's similar to a partnership fee, but it's not quite the same.
That's just my idea, though. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's also why, like, little tangent. That's why when Rain says stuff like, I don't know, we might not say yes to Blast in the future.
They're playing hard to get, right? Okay.
It's like, come on,
okay.
we all know you are.
All
like,
right.
Your org's gonna make you do it. Like, beyond that, I agree that having bottom feeder teams who were practically holding on purely by virtue of the fact that they were partners, it was bad. Like, it did ruin, I want to say, like 1/5 of the games at any kind of EPL Blast group event.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that's going away, because now we're just going to have teams that are there by merit. Like, I guess there's wildcard invites, but that's practically a merit. Actually, the rules have changed on wildcards a couple times now, and we talked about this on a podcast before. Not a big deal, but let's just say this. The vast majority of teams are there by merit, and including the wildcard teams, which I think are like merit of the region that they're in. So whatever, it's still a regional based invite, or like strength of the team invite. So no, I don't think there's really anything that could be perceived as bad for this, except for from the side of the orgs that practically were fielding bad teams. Now you just don't get to have those free tournaments to play. That's it.
Yeah, the one downside I'll say is this, right? Look, the reason why the partner thing existed, even though I agree, I actually think how it was applied, and especially the reality of what it made the tournaments like and who the teams we saw playing with, was unfortunately, overall, I'd say largely a negative, because it wasn't able to do what essentially, I've always said ESL did the best compromise. They simultaneously had invites, because their events were way bigger than Blast, so they could invite all the top teams you wanted, so they make sure no matter what, you get the teams you want. But then they also had that brilliant playing system where you could sort of make it anyway if you were actually good. Whereas the problem Blast always had, I thought, was they had like the double whammy, the opposite. Because remember, originally they only used to have like the 12 teams, if you remember, total. That was like the total number of invites, and you could only get those, like, it was like 2 spots. It was even one for NA and one for EU for like the showdown from the online thing. So unfortunately what it meant was simultaneously, when orgs fielded bad lineups, like you're saying, it basically like undercut the whole tournament, because actually when you had like as many teams as they had, you only had 8 teams at the lands. You needed them all to be straight fire. You couldn't have like 2 of them be kind of like scuff teams, or like a bad EG lineup or something. Like, if people remember, some of the bad orgs were bad quite a lot. Like OG was all right, I guess, sometimes, but they weren't a top team. MIBR was usually fairly bad because they had budget rosters. Obviously, EG was the notorious one that would almost come last like every single time and have to go into that showdown again. But the problem it also had is, because it wasn't able to make a system, because it just had like the one online European spot eventually for the top teams. It also meant you would pretty much almost every Blast miss at least one big team. Like I had a quick look while you were talking there. At different eras and times, some of these teams were absolutely top 2 or 3 teams in the world. ENCE, Maus, Virtus Pro. Remember, famously, Virtus Pro only got to play that like Blast World Finals because they won the fucking major. Like, aside from that, they'd never been in this circuit. I know now they got like the extra spot or expansion spot, whatever it's called, but like stuff like that. Like, yeah, that was a big deal back then, because what it meant was you would get times in the circuit where it was like simultaneous. It was like simultaneously you had a bad team no one wanted to see, like EG player, but then also you could have had an event like that where like ENCE might have just won some straight fire event, or like come top 2 and had a great game, and then you go to the next tournament, you have to just pretend they don't exist. And that's actually part of the reason why. One thing I will say is this. We still joke on a hot take point made, but at this point in time, they are actually sort of right. I'm actually going to remove the banana copper Cassad status from Blast now. Like, one, Blast does now have basically all the best teams. Secondly, now the finals are best of 5 as well. I think if you look at all the things they've added, like, they actually are, like, pretty sweet. Their events are almost as good as most of the ESL ones at this point in time, you know, and they can be excellent because of the BO5 final. So I sort of agree. It was you notice it was mainly Blast in terms of, like, a lot of the negatives of that, but I do think also, this is the last thing I'll say, the reason why I understand why they did it, though, is it was actually, like, an attempted solution at the big problem of the time, which you sort of keyed in on there, which is teams at the time, it was considered to be like almost like too much of a gamble to be in Counter-Strike. Like, essentially, if you didn't make it to the major, you just fucked your whole year's budget. It didn't make any sense. So I can tell you, I did a lot of shows. You can look on the internet of like the know-it-alls of CS show, me and Lurpis. And obviously Lurpis is an expert on finance stuff. And he basically explained on one episode sometime, I'm going to say like, I don't know, 9 months ago or something, like last year, I think it was. He once explained that like if you were a team and you like successfully were in Blast and like the Louvre agreement, and then like just off that alone, you could make something like, I don't know, like 2 million a year or something like that. Some pretty good number where, I mean, this is obviously based on what the stick is worth and stuff, and then what the performance bonuses and the orgs are. But the point was, you could sort of break even if you were giant orgs. At the time, it was perceived as like, this is just the cost of doing business, isn't it, to do it this way? So I think the logic now it supposedly goes, because you're going to sort of supplement way more tournaments as well. If you notice, the prize money is going to be way higher than it was in past years. They're trying to just make it like, it'll just figure out for everyone, like teams will find, like as you're alluding to there, by the way, the other thing you can technically do is you can also have a system where it doesn't have to be an overt partner spot. You can just have a thing where you offer incentives like that, or you have like an appearance fee is the other one. If people don't know behind the scenes, that I've heard is a thing like, you know, if you're a bigger org, understandably, you can command a bigger appearance fee. It makes sense, by the way. By the way, even if I dunk on like Furia, well, I can tell you, we want Furia there for the viewership, no matter what you think of the team. So I think essentially, in a way, the world is healing, Anders. The world is healing. I agree with you.
Yeah, well, I don't want to bring up, you know, old grievances or anything, but I mean, the obviously part of the point of what was going to happen in Flashpoint was that there was going to be like a punishment if you kept performing badly.
Yeah, that was kind of prescient, wasn't it? Yeah.
It was like that actually would have been fun because the problem was like it does suck to see the same team finish like in the, you know, in the bottom part of the tournament every single time, and then you just think like, well, there's like nothing happens. Like all that happens is they show up next time, they have one new player, and we all have to pretend that we're excited about this, you know, new lineup. Instead of the other way around, where it's like the lineup actually shows us something in qualifying for the tournament, and then we're excited because they did that. It's like it kind of ended up being backwards. So at least I want the story of like real consequences for whatever. Like I don't care if it's because they're not in the next tournament, like they have to requalify, or it could be a monetary punishment. Whatever it is, it needs more story than just. We'll see how they do next time. Maybe they have a new player that I don't know who is, and you know I have to pretend to be. I'm looking forward to that not being a part of Counter-Strike. Hopefully, it'll work better. I think.
No, by the way, I'm with you. I will say, obviously, we never did implement that in Flashpoint. I mean, spoiler: there was sort of a big event in the world that no one knew. Some would say a Black Swan event that no one could plan for. That changed all the rules, didn't it? And behind the scenes, I can tell you, the teams themselves then obviously didn't want to do that because it's like, why are we going to find each other when we're playing online CS basically, and basically sort of play chicken and make everyone run up $1 million lamps? Now, look, that sucked for me, but I can see why in the moment they didn't do it. But if people don't know, the reason why it makes sense that we actually essentially almost got ahead of this problem is because Lopez was the one who designed that concept, Anders. He was the one who figured out basically the best approach you could take would be you find them an amount, but the clever thing he did, if you ever saw the amount, was like 100,000, is that was like a sweet spot where what would happen is it meant that like if you were just bad, you could just tank the 100,000, but it meant that you couldn't be bad for like 9 months, because if you're bad for 9 months, it's 900k. You may as well have just bought like Nico for 600k back then, you know what I mean? As in back when that was the real price, you know? At that point, it actually automatically incentivized you to basically think of it like, I'm going to lose the money anyway, so why don't I spend it on a better player? I always thought it was genius, and I think he also did a thing where, because obviously Flashpoint was owned by the teams, I think the logic would even be back then that like the fine you paid got like distributed to the other teams as almost like you paying them off for you bringing a shit lineup to the league. That was actually kind of a cool idea. Again, it didn't get implemented. I get this is all just spitballing, but I do think if you were going to do a system like that, you needed something like that. Because unfortunately, I think Blast did prove that there were certain orgs, I mentioned some of them earlier, who, here's the thing, right? I actually won't even blame like NIP here. NIP tried signing fucking massive names, guys. They tried to sign Device and Brawlhard and Config and Elixir. Like, they had shit lineups. They did a bad job GMing, but they did sign players. The ones I don't care about is some of the other names where they put really cynical teams in where, like Maui's saying, you even knew when you saw the team list, they're never making it through. And even worse, I'm going to have to see them next Blast Fall groups or whatever. You know, like, there's some teams that were so cynical, they clearly just did like a min-max. They were like, right, what's that amount of pursuers I get from being in Blast, right? That I make this much, spend the minimum possible salary, and they weren't trying actively to be good. So I agree. I actually thought Flashpoint sort of had the solution there, but who knows? In many ways, that will be Flashpoint's epitaph. It was the solution that nobody wanted to try. There you go. That could be it. Right, Maui, what is your good point?
Mine is just focusing on one of the teams that made it through the Americas RMR, and no, I'm not gonna prop up wild card for their great run, but
I will say, shout out to Tech Girl for what is actually, in context, one of the most outrageous things ever said on a Counter-Strike broadcast, Matt Anders. When after that game, when they beat Liquid, she actually said on stream, she goes, something like, Amaranth Yeast beer for everyone, or something like it's like, holy fuck. But I think, like, again, like the producer guy won't have really got what that meant, but that's actually okay. Even though, by the way, it's straight fire, it's actually wild. What a mad comment to say. I loved it though. Straight fire. It was actually
that was ridiculous.
That cracked me the fuck up, bro.
Dust has made Amaranth fart jokes multiple times now as well. But no, we're focusing on
of course.
the team that's a little bit more pure in nature. Okay. MIBR.
Yes.
MIBR, they made it through 3-0 through the Americas RMR. I had them as a team to make it through on my official 7-team predictions.
Oh, you mean of just the 7 of the 7 you picked, you meant, right?
Yeah. I didn't pick them as 3-0, but I thought they were going to make it through. But I would just say, like, they are playing better CS now, and I want to say that the Lucalzi edition, it's already bore fruit. It already looks like they're a better team overall. He is less error prone, or even if he does something that might be a mistake in the micro, he's much better mechanically than BR Enizan was in the micro, and his aim is just crazy. He's setting up so many of his players too, and you know, I want to prop up him as an individual, but it's also just how they're using him, because he's getting to be this sort of second entry player, and we can see with certain teams like Liquid, for example, you'd say on paper there's more firepower on that team with Liquid. I mean, you got JKS, Twist, NAF, but the problem is that they're all a little bit more passive, and then that means that people like Yakindar and Ultimate have to be more on the entry duties. But MIBR have two guys that are naturally very aggressive in Insani and Lucalzi now. And I would even say MIBR kind of did a really weird move here where they wanted Lucalzi for over a year. In 2023, there were rumors that they were going to pick him up. Nice. And they finally got him. And it feels a little bit confusing because Lucalzi would naturally slot into a lot of Insani spots, but they're basically just putting him in the second most aggressive spot on the map instead of his natural, like, pure entry, hyper aggressive position, and it's working really well. Like, they basically now have two guys who can set up other teammates, and it's actually helping people like Exit, for example. Like, Exit is tethering with Lucalzi, and Exit was the highest rated player on MIBR throughout the actual event. But it's and that's the thing. Like, he's been on this team for a long time, but when he had to play off BR Enizan's just kind of like, he's not always making optimal moves. He's not actually usually always doing damage to the first guy because he's not ready for the next fight. But now Exit can just trade off of Lucalzi, and it looks way better. Like, when they played against Complexity, he looked really clean. Versus Imperial, Exit was the best player in that game, and he did get to, on CT side, they both got to play the A bomb site together of Nuke, and then Lucalzi, like, if they're losing outside control, Lucalzi's just going to push hut or door, no questions asked. Exit follows him, and it's just a smooth trade, or even just a clean entry. So it gave them a huge new tool, and there were some worrying signs at the very beginning, but I'm just going to say incredibly steady progress. Very first event that Lucalzi played with them, he had a 0.86 rating. Like, that's horrible. Then a 0.94 in the next one, 1.06. Like, he's getting better pretty much instantaneously. Like, every single consecutive event, he's getting significantly better, and maybe they don't go on a major run, but I would say that I would put them through to make it to the next stage of the major. I'm not going to go to the playoffs, but I would say, like, I think they're going to make it through that first stage of the major.
Okay.
Well, First of all, fuck you for answering all my questions while you're talking, Maui. That's it's very uncalled for. Makes it hard for me to poke any holes in this. But one of the things that I was gonna when they picked up Lucchesi, I thought they were picking it up to be like the new superstar of the team. And I guess in terms of just like numbers alone, it doesn't seem like that's the case. But you already answered that. You're saying he's unlocking the rest of the players. So I guess that's good news. Like, do you think that's going to keep happening, or do you think the goal is for him to like really be fast tracked up to that spot? Because that's really what I thought. Like when everyone's talking about it, and like you said, they've been talking about it for a really long time. I thought he was going to be like top of the scoreboard every single time, and from what I can tell in the Americas RMR, that wasn't quite the case. Even if they win, like obviously that's great news still. But it kind of makes me wonder. And then the other thing that just frustrates me, I guess, about the Brazilian scene in general is that, obviously, some of us remember back to like the point in time when it was like, it was like the old MIBR lineup and SK and all those like, sick lineups where like Brazil was like a really feared, region. And right now it seems like they have so many talented players, but they're all scattered across like all these different teams. So I guess like my question is this MIBR team like the one that's going to make the real punch through and sort of bring Brazil back to like former glory, or do they still need to steal more players from other lineups? Like there's so many good ones,
I actually have I think that this lineup should be allotted at least 6 months. I think this is one where on paper there's no question marks for me anymore. That's the big part of this. Like Drop is doing a great job as a support player and in-game leader. Sometimes pretty selfless on CT sides, like he's taking some openers here and there. But I think that this actually frees up Insani to even be a better version of himself too. Like at this tournament, it's crazy because we always build Insani almost as like a donk for MIBR. If you actually look at his opening attempts for the Americas RMR, it's under 20%. Like he's actually not even entering as much as he used to because Lucchesi's taking so many more opening duels. And again, like, yeah, he's not necessarily putting up an insane number, but come on, 1.06, like, Yakindar would finally feel redeemed if he's able to put up a 1.06. And if you have a guy that's a hard entry in this day and age, like nobody's like, come on, like Donk set such an unrealistic expectation along with what Nico's doing as well and Mobs too. But if you actually have an entry that's improving with a 1.06 and taking the most opening fights for your team, you're in an incredibly strong position. So maybe teams are right now adjusting themselves to the new MIBR, but I feel like when you have a couple weapons who are both capable of being hard entries, as opposed to the singular force of teams like even Yakindar, well, Yakindar with Liquid obviously, but even Donk with Spirit, then I think teams start to game plan a little bit harder because they just know that it's going to be this one guy and he has his favorite plays on the map. But Insani and Lucchesi, they have very similar skill sets, but they don't overlap entirely in terms of all the same plays that they want to run for themselves.
People will know I've actually, obviously because I'm an Insani fan, I've even did a video on my YouTube about it. I've actually always thought this MIBR team is like slightly underrated because I always used to say, if you ever look at the roster, the only thing they're really missing is just like a classic IGL. There's not someone famous that who does IGL here. Aside from that, especially now they've got Lucchesi, like they've got all the fucking roles filled. Like, by the way, I'm not joking. There isn't a single bad player on this team in my opinion. Like if people don't know, I always tell people, I can tell who actually watched MIBR play because if they're like, that safe guy was that, it's like, he's like 1.5 times better in this team than he was in Furia. Like you could see in Furia, they never actually let him play the AWP and play like a primary AWP. So I think the good thing is, like, I was interested on the role aspect you brought up there because actually, if they can make it work, I think this is the team right now, mate. Look, you could obviously make it a better Brazilian team with massive names and if you had all the money and all the rest of it. But like, I think if you look at this roster and you consider where MIBR already was, where they could cause the odd upset and do like sort of like some dark horse play, I could see a world where this roster, unironically, becomes like what the Mongols is, where they could be like a top 10 team. And look, the reason I bring the Mongols up specifically is because obviously they were like ranked number 5 at one point or something, right? And that's obviously not super legit. Like they didn't go to like IM Cologne to make the semis or something. But I think this team could do that. They could be the team where, first of all, you beat most of the teams below you. And then if you get the right team in terms of the V-Tour, you can win a best of 3 here and there. You could win some top teams. Like there's definitely the firepower in this team. I also do think as well, like it's quite cool actually, like you say, Maui, that they've apparently wanted the Kowsi guy for all this time. They finally got him. But they've also got him actually when everything else in the team's peaking. There's actually quite a good window of time. In fact, I even think if people haven't noticed this roster change, a lot of people, I agree with you, they could easily be shocked at this major, mate. This is exactly the sort of team that in those BO1s in that first Swiss system just gets like a scalp off some huge team and then like, beat some other like mid-level and suddenly you're in the like game where you should win 1 BO3, you're into the actual like main part of the major. So no, I agree. I actually think this is a really fun team to watch as well. I also enjoy their style. They have like a classical Brazilian style of play. So and by the way, there's also, you notice here's a cool thing as well when you consider past past good Brazilian teams. There is zero drama or sort of like out of the game shenanigans. This is actually what the Brazilians were when they first came in the scene. They were just hard-working players that were skilled, and you were just waiting for them to sort of like get acclimatized to being a top team. Like, there's no negatives to this team. Like, people are going to think, like, it's not even any meme aspect. There's no person who's had any beef. Like, I think it's actually just a very positive project. Like, it's simmered for a long time, but it's actually ready to cook, I think. It looks pretty good to me. I like the lineup. Right. My point, I've made this more of a broad point, because I saw after the America's RMR, someone ran those stats where they showed, and this is actually quite shocking to me, bro. I'm the historian, but I forgot this aspect. Did you see that because Complexity qualified? Bro, EliGE has like way more major qualifications than anyone else in NA. Did you see that? He had something 14 or something mental. And then I'm not joking, like second was like 8 or something, or like nat 10 or something, like NAF or something. And by the way, because it's NAF, if they're in like the same era and they both keep qualifying, he's never going to catch up. Like basically, EliGE is way ahead in terms of major qualifications. And then also, so what I thought I would make the good point is, I thought this is another good point to sort of just touch on the fact that, like, in CS2, EliGE has completely reverted the trajectory of his career. If you remember at the end of CSGO, most people would have said this is the sort of team he should be on, but more from the negative, sort of like that's where you deserve to be, EliGE. You know, like maybe you can, like, you know, basically like go and battle like with Grim and Floppy and see if you can be the best in their team. Whereas instead, I think everyone agrees, including it looks like EliGE, he's mega overqualified for call the entire time CS2's been out. Like, he actually's unironically been, for me, almost a top 10 player like every month of CS2. And if you're watching this team, it's also one of those players where, look, you could argue the other direction too. Maybe he calls his own a number a lot. Maybe he's selfish. Who knows? But I tell you what, everything in this team fucking runs through this guy. Like, they just live and die on his back when he has an AK on T-side. Like, it's ridiculous. But he is mega. Like, he's actually showed in CS2. Like, it's one of the rare times I've ever seen a player go almost all the way down and then all the way back up again. So, like, the point that, like, you could argue he's as good as in his peak at this point in time. So, I was just thinking about it because I was thinking, right, you consider how many other names there are. You have people like, obviously, fucking Stewie 2K lost his head for a while. He's not even on the team right now, out of the game for ages. You have Tarek just is off in Valorant. You have all these great NA names, and most of them, like Stanislaw came back again, most of them never really get to be at the top. You don't really, in general, one of the saddest things I think about CS is you don't get that true class of like Hall of Famers in NA that we got in Europe. Think of like how many generations you can go through. You can go through the first generation of Scream and those guys, then you can go to the ones with, you know, like Olaf Meister and Big Guardian and stuff, then you can go to the latter. In NA, you have like a couple of bunches, and most of them just aren't even here anymore. So to me, it's actually a big deal to have like one of the legendary players still really good at the game and still around. Like, he's still playing in an NA team even. Although, by the way, we'll see how long that lasts. But, you know, he is technically now still playing in an NA team. What do you guys think of this?
I have a bunch of things that are going to sound like they're not really compliments at all, but like I want to go on. Like, I think what's so exciting for me about EliGE as well is this idea that he really was like the king of Liquid. Like, I don't know how many years he was on Liquid, but it seemed like he was essentially forever, right?
Yes.
And he, you know, for anyone that knows anything about how that team worked, like, he really was the kingmaker on that team. Like, if someone needed to go out of the team, it was always going to be EliGE called to say, you're out, you know? But the problem is, when you run through enough good players, eventually the finger's going to be pointed at you. People are going to say, well, listen, you had all this material to work with. You guys are still not winning like the big tournaments. So we need, like, unfortunately now it's your turn. Like, everyone's going to turn around and point at you. And I'm going to be honest, when that happened, and I think the writing was sort of on the wall for a long time, maybe even longer than I actually expected. When it finally happened, I thought, there's no way he's going to come back and play like really good Counter-Strike. Because like, imagine what a massive hit that is to your ego. And I'm not saying that in a bad way. I'm saying, like, if you're someone who is playing the kind of Counter-Strike that EliGE does, like, you almost have to be like a super ego person. Like, you have to believe that every time you step in the server, you're going to crush everyone in front of you. So, like, unfortunately, you probably can't turn that off too much. And, like, obviously, I think Liquid even made like a little mini documentary kind of thing where they sort of talked about, you know, him having, you know, maybe sort of a fragile mindset that, like, you know, it was like there was a little bit of everything. Like, he was a super strong weapon, but also there was the other side of him where he could be very critical towards his teammates and all the rest of it. And I think, so in a way, like, if finally, like, you're out of options and now you're kicked from the team or you're removed from the team or whatever, and now you're joining Complexity and it's like, you have to rebuild, and you're doing it with Grim, who was on your team, and somebody who, you know, like, it's the whole dynamic is set up for you to feel like that's it, like, it's over for me. And then he comes back and still plays amazing Counter-Strike. Like, it's actually so sick in a way, because it is in a way you could say, well, it's one thing to play with like all the best NA people on Liquid. You
Absolutely,
have like insane resources. Like, not to discount what they did, but it's just like you could have made that argument to say, well, you know, yeah, but he was on Liquid with all the best players, and now he's still doing it. Like, it is kind of sick. Like, he's building actually a really sick story for himself, I think, in a weird way.
I mean, for EliGE on this comeback, it's been the driving force for why Complexity even has the floor that they do. If it weren't for like, because everybody else's form has been wavering on Complexity, and he's I don't know if I want to say single-handedly, but I feel like I have to. Like, he's
sometimes it feels like it, doesn't it?
Yeah, he's single-handedly keeping them in relevancy, despite the fact that, yeah, I think Grim has actually had a little bit of a resurgence as a player. I think Floppy actually looked pretty good at parts of this RMR, but you know, there's other tournaments where they completely fall off. So I feel like if it weren't for EliGE, like, man, like, I almost think Jason Lake just needs to, regardless of what happens with EliGE, and if he goes to another team or if he, you know, goes to Europe, what have you, I think Jason Lake needs to make a public thank you letter for what EliGE has done to uphold like Complexity's status as an organization.
That does make Cole. The only thing is though, Maui, that makes Cole sound kind of bomby. That for like 1 year in the org, you want to like build one of those Michael Jordan statues outside like the Cole headquarters or whatever. Like that does make you look a bit shit as an org. Oh, by the way, I also noticed from what Anders was saying, he is correct there. You notice Anders did a meta-analysis of what happens when you have like, you know, Game of Thrones type environments. Well, I will say, Anders, you will know this because we were all there at Flashpoint 2. It's like what happened to Mauisnake when he used to play Among Us with us. Because remember, Maui got too addicted to that game of trying to marinate people all the time and always be the ultimate imposter. But what it meant was, by the end, even when he's not the imposter and he's telling the truth and doing the tasks, everyone just assumed he's the imposter and just kept fucking kicking him or saying he was lying. So I agree. The problem is, Anders, that game, it can't work long run. Eventually, he's right. Eventually, they realise it's just you kicking everyone and pulling all the strings. So, you know, by the way, unironically, that is sort of what happened to him in Liquid, by the way, guys. What really happened is, it's actually one of the rare times where it is what it looks like from the outside. From the outside, it was EliGE's team the whole time because he was the shit and he was the man, and it worked. That's the crucial thing. I've always said this to Simple. You can, by the way, if you tell people basically, give me the resources and I'll carry, but you then carry, that's just responsible at that point in time. You're not even being a dick, bro. You're actually helping your teammates. You win the game. But the problem becomes, as I always told Simple, mate, if you ever don't carry those games, though, mate, you better change that fucking attitude because that doesn't work. That equation doesn't resolve anymore. So the problem EliGE had was when his level went down, and especially when Liquid just wasn't as good at like, playing the modern style, they unironically did, like, internally in the org, it became Yikindar's team for real. Like, when Yikindar joined, he was so dope at the game, he was bringing the new meta. That really is sort of how it went. So that is kind of how we got kicked out. And by the way, I totally agree with you, Anders. You could even say, bearing in mind, actually, EliGE literally did have one of those Shocks-esque reputations of like he's the princess and, you know, everything has to be his way. I actually think you could argue a lot of people would have said he's going to be done then if he goes to a smaller team. Like if you go to a smaller team where they don't have all those great players, like you said, by the way, players like that usually get even more angry when like a lesser teammate fucks up. I'm actually fairly impressed that, like, look, I do get the sense he's still pretty intense, but I think he actually holds it in even fairly reasonably. I've never seen him do some simple shit where you're like fucking shooting shots at people in interviews and stuff. Like he maybe look, he has one of the worst reaction cam ones. He definitely does that one where he reacts every time, but it's like he does fucking keep it down though. You know, he doesn't let it overflow. It feels like
it's also like to some extent, right? You can't. It's hard to have one with the other. Like it makes sense why some of these players that are like you said, really intense, right? Like the kind of you get one side of it, which like you're like a Nico or like an EliGE, someone you're like really skilled, but then and that also means it's hard for the rest of the team to criticize you, right? Who's going to step up and say, hey, bro, calm down. Like, we're also just trying to have a good time.
And there's actually a story for real where I asked Simple in my reflections with him. Because there's like a video or whatever where Alexi B said something to him when they first made that Na'Vi team where it was the international lineup. Like, Alexi B said to Simple something like, you know, you're always flaming us, but can we actually flame you? And Simple, I actually asked Simple this question, like, well, can they? Can they just turn around to you? And he said, sadly, the way he even said it was so iconic, Anders, he just went, they can try. Which is like, what? But it's not what you're saying. It's so true, yeah.
Yeah.
But there is something, like, obviously from like a regular like social, you know, contract point of view, like we all don't like it when people are arrogant and like full of ego. But in some sense, in a competition, like if you earn that level, like I think
Yeah,
you should be allowed. You should be allowed to really have like a super arrogant attitude and say like, I am just the best, and this team doesn't exist without me. And all that. Like it might be unpleasant if they were your friend and they were in the room next to you, and you'd be like, oh, this is making the situation. But they're not. They're in a competition trying to win. So I have a huge tolerance for like people who are like super aggressive and even somewhat arrogant and filled with ego when it comes to these things, because in a way that's also what makes them like super incredible competitors, right? Like I think the idea of saying we want to take these people and remove that part and still have them be as good, you probably can't do that.
No, I'll give you two quick angles. One, it's like when people say about like on-camera person, like, oh, it'd be great to have a beer with. It's like, Joe, the role I play isn't supposed to be the guy you like and would have a beer with. I'm there to be the annoying guy who says the shit you don't like, but that makes it spicy. Already, that doesn't make sense as an application. You'd basically be getting the guy you wouldn't want to see on camera, but you'd want to have a beer with. And then also, on that point of like the players, the reason why it literally makes sense, Anders, is one of the things that is actually, I've always found this so incredible about the best players ever. Even when I used to stand like at an event behind f0rest or something, is it's not a joke. When he does like the most insane 3K you've ever done in your life, he doesn't even flinch. It looks like his heart rate doesn't even go, because in his brain, he has the arrogance to go, I need to get this last kill to close the round though. Like that way of thinking, normal humans, the rest of us are just mortals in that sense. So in a way, you have to be insanely egotistical. Think about some of the rounds you've seen where like Simple just like re-peaks on the 1v1 to no-scope someone in their head. It's like, normal players don't do it. That's actually an inadvisable play, guys. But if you're Simple, not only does he do it, but we fucking love that he does it. We want him to do that. I told people this story back in the day. I used to actually not like EliGE, because he was everything I don't like. He was just like some quiet, moody, brooding little guy who was like super nerdy. At the time, he wasn't even that good, if you remember. He was just like an above-average player who hadn't yet blossomed. And I'd heard all this stuff like, because I was friends with Hiko. I'd heard like, he's a bit pissy in the team, a bit. But then I told everyone this story before. The moment that turned me, because listen, this plays right into everything I love about narrative building. It's some anime. This is some like shonen anime shit. It's the story that I was told by a bunch of them where they had this discussion after the ESL Cologne Major when they made that final. And the discussion basically was, look, we obviously don't have Simple under contract. If we want to sign him, we've got to do it now because Navi's going to sign him. So if we sign him, we're going to have to give him a giant contract basically. So let's all take like a poll now. Do we try? Like, do we go for it? Do we go for the Simple move? And famously, right, it was like sort of like, it was like some American exit. It was like tied at the very end. It was like, oh, this person says I don't mind. This person says I want to. The other one says, I'll go along with whatever anyone says. And then the last vote for real, like, came down to like EliGE is the story I was told, right? And when it came down to him, I can't remember if someone says he actually said this line, because this sounds too much like out of a movie, or if they just meant this is the gist of what he said. But basically, someone like Hiko said something like, I did sort of say in the meeting, like, but the guy just mega carried us. Like, who's going to carry us if not him? And supposedly, EliGE said, me. Now, when I heard that story, Anders, that's just what the doctor ordered, mate. Yeah. I love that. Especially because then, by the way, literally, you not only said that, but I'm not even joking. That's almost like the moment where if you ever go and see him just look on Hitchell, that's like the moment his career just goes like this, like the spike upwards. Like, he actually did it as well. He actually, remember, he actually won like a Grand Slam without Simple there. They were like that close to a major, an era. Like, that sort of story, I agree with you. I always say the level of arrogance and bad attitude, that's just tempered by how good you are. If you're really good, by the way, I'll give you mad room. I'll give you like crazy stakes that you can go. Like the real problem people like Boris had was just they're not actually Nico. Like if you were, by the way, you could have been changing mouse every fucking day, mate. We wouldn't give a fuck. Like if you're that cracked out, it's all good. No, I'm with you. Yeah. I do like the way this was actually the good point, but half of it was just like, anyway, egotistical star bloody. Yeah. I know. Right, Anders, what is your bad point then?
Well, my bad point is that it's starting to feel like co-streaming is a better business model than running a tournament or even casting or anything else. There's like a news story out right now, I think, from League. I can't remember, like the LDL or the LPL or whatever it's called. I don't know.
The main Chinese league, so like the second biggest league in the world, basically, is no longer going to have like a real English broadcast. It's just going to be co-streamers. Yeah.
Yeah, and the issue is like, I kind of wonder, it might even be from a business point of view, it makes more sense. Obviously, I think Riot are trying to sell it, saying it's like a better experience. I mean, we can. It doesn't seem like the community is on board with that. But either way, that's kind of a worrying sign for the future. I think the idea that you basically sort of starting to say, well, why even do a broadcast? Or why not just host the tournament, give the clean feed to other people? I mean, we know in Valorant, Tarek is essentially dwarfing the mainstream on like half the broadcasts. And I mean, I'm happy for Tarek. I think he's a cool guy. So like, I'm happy that he's doing well and making tons of money on that. But obviously, if you take a step back and you look at the industry as a whole, it does create like a really weird scenario where it's like, well, then what is the future of all of this stuff? Like, are we going to Are we gonna get like, you know, the next big sort of like caster to come through to like really change? Is that person just gonna be a streamer? And like, is like, why would they, on some level, why even pursue the casting career if you could just kind of do it on your own stream and co-stream everything? Like, it just opens up a bunch of questions, and I've put it in bad. I guess it's a bit presumptuous. Maybe it will end up being really good, but obviously from, you know, my position, super biased.
No, but we can just do it. We can just do it from the bad frame. Like, I have a follow-up to ask you, actually, Anders. Look, there's an obvious reason, self-indulgent, why you yourself would ask this question, which is basically it's worse than that, isn't it? Like, if you look at how core streamers tend to core stream, the one thing they don't do is commentate. Like, essentially, as far as I can tell, Anders, commentary won't exist if this is the new model, because first of all, commentary already is like we're trying to ape sports and have a person talk all the time, which is like a traditional model, which isn't in core streaming, you know. As core streaming is more like a watch party, isn't it? It's like a bunch of people watching and occasionally commenting. And then also, as you say, why would anyone even start that job if there's no path at the end, right? Like, as you say, if anything, you'd be better off the joke is, unironically, right, if they did this model in CS2, you'd be better off doing what Donna does and just be a streamer and work your way tangentially into broadcasts than being like Neokai, who works with Anders now. There wouldn't be a position to work with Anders in the new world, right? Does that disturb you as someone who's in the craft of casting?
Here's a different, you know, way to approach it. Maybe imagine this instead. Imagine if, let's say, Tarek existed for, you know, for Counter-Strike, or, you know, like he wasn't doing Valorant, but he was doing Counter-Strike, or you know, it's ohnePixel. Someone like, what if I went to ohnePixel and I said, hey, listen, why don't I cast, but just only for your stream, and then you can do the react, like, and then he would pay me. I actually think he could, like, that actually might, from a business point of view, almost make more sense, right? Because like, without the casting, it's going to be a little bit harder to be a co-streamer, because now there's going to be a lot of dead silence where like nothing is happening. But I'm going to be honest, I'm not even totally against it. Like, sometimes when I'm not like watching, when I'm not like at an event casting or something, sometimes I'll tune in and listen to Flom's stream. I just like his stream. I think it's a nice place to hang out. And sometimes I get it. Like, sometimes he will even be commenting on like what somebody else is casting. Like, he'll say like, "Oh, the caster said this. I don't know about that." Like, I totally understand the value that it brings and like the community feel to it. So it's not like it's valueless. It's just that it's just putting everyone in a weird spot. Like, I don't know what the future looks like for that, but it feels like we're like at that point where pretty soon a lot of people are gonna have to make up their minds about what this looks like. You know.
I mean, I've done a lot of co-streaming this year and sort of made a secondary brand through it, and it's built my fan base up pretty tremendously, actually. It's kind of created a whole Maui snake pit army. So I mean, it's already in a way.
What just happened there? You do like the cinnamon challenge or so? What's happened there?
No, I don't know what just happened. I just ran in the cold. I just took a run in the cold, so it was
it's all good.
No, it's just that it's opened up a lot for me already, and it actually has made the feeling of not getting hired to events sting a little bit less, if I'm being completely honest. But in another way, it's also kind of given me a bartering tool for driving up my rate, actually, as a broadcast analyst, because I'm missing out on the potential growth and the actual just pure numbers that I would earn by actually co-streaming. So I mean, I'm speaking. I think, like, I see the bad of it, because, you know, I actually do have to weigh it in a way now. It's like, I don't know if I'd really want, like, there's certain tier 1.5 events, like, you know, for example.
Oh, right. Do you think if you took certain gigs, it would like affect like the built up like momentum of doing the core streams or something? Is that the problem?
I think if I did this event, I mean, okay, let me just be completely honest. Like, looking at my numbers, looking at the growth that I've had in a year, in one more year, if I have the same growth that I had from last September, in 1 year's time, I would make more from streaming than I would doing event work.
Oh wow!
Just
okay.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. That's why it's actually incredibly. It's tantalizing. It's like it's very tempting actually to just drop doing broadcast work and just full pivot into co-streaming.
By the way, that's even one angle I'll say, which is why I can tell you people like Riot want to do this, because all they're thinking is, wait a minute, you yourself have your own sponsors, your own streamer. We just don't pay anything, and you just give us the stream for free. Like that's saving money on that, mate. That's cost saving, yeah.
Yeah. So it's very tempting, and I feel like it is like, okay. The funny line that Harmony Korine, if people know the film director, he did Spring Breakers, like that was his most famous one. He said he had this quote that was saying that that film is losing talent to live streamers, and his actual quote was, "I show speed is the new Tarkovsky."
Oh, King, that might be the worst thing anyone ever said in the English language, literally ever.
Yeah, no, but I kind of get it. Like a lot of creative,
Why couldn't he just say like, you know, fucking J.J. Abrams? Why did he have to go to Tarkovsky as well, just to like?
I know. Honestly, like it shouldn't have been that. Imagine he says like Hassan Abi is the new Kubrick or something.
If people don't know, that's like saying something like, I think Future is the new Beethoven. Like, oh, shut the fuck up on every level.
I know. He went way too far with
I
that.
know,
one,
you cooked too much on that one. You cooked too much.
Also, it's like your parasocial is showing on their grams. You know, it's like, come on.
Okay.
No, but like I do think that that creatives now that are entering this space and seeing esports are like, you know, when I was like in college and I was seeing esports evolving, I was like, okay, what are these roles? What do I think is interesting about it? And I was like, okay, I think these desk analyst roles, I think there's a way that I could be in that position. I think if I target that space. But now actually, no, like, I mean, what someone from my college, actually a few years younger than me, became like a live streamer, and she probably could have been I think she's like a top 200 live streamer now or whatever. And it's like, if she probably was like, you know, 5 years older, she might have been a broadcast talent. But it's just like, you look at the money, you look at the possible earnings, and you just say to yourself, like, when do you also have the most brand control? And becoming your own personality and co-streamer is the ceiling is much higher.
So you mean you're not even the best streamer from your college? There's some girls number one. You're just number two.
I actually forgot her name, but like, yeah,
is she famous?
It's getting more.
Yeah, she's really famous.
She's top 200. Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
What sort of content does she stream though?
Like IRL content.
Oh, right, okay. Oh, wait a minute. Please tell me she's not going like, banana, so good, hot dog. Is that? By the way, you know what's sad? Maui of all the people, I think Maui could actually make sick money doing that in esports. If he was just doing NPC things like that, I think people would fucking buy it up. They'd be paying so much for him to eat the hot dog or whatever.
Emily Zhang. Okay. Emily Zhang. She does stuff with like Mizkif.
Okay. That's fair enough. Then she's pretty big. Then okay.
Yeah. Okay. She's huge. Okay. I forgot her.
By the way, I will say
extra Emily, 433,000 followers.
Fucking hell. Yeah. Okay, that's like all of our followers combined. That's pretty good. That's pretty good.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, she was a freshman when I was a senior. Yeah.
Okay.
I think just to add to the point you were just saying, like, I think it's important for people to maybe understand, just to contextualize some of this point, is that if I'm getting hired for, let's say, like 7 events, then when the 7th event ends, like, my impact on whatever is going on like ends right then and there. Like, if I don't get hired for event number like 8, 9, 10, then that's it. Like, I'm just kind of gone from history in some sense, like almost immediately, or not just almost, exactly when that stops. And the thing where streaming on your own channel and doing like this stuff is different is because, like, you can kind of keep going, you know, for like even if you don't get co-streaming rights for a particular event, like, obviously that's the big threat if you're a co-streamer, is if some tournament says actually you can't do it after all. I'm sure that sucks and is super frustrating. But even if that happens, like, you're not down to zero. Like, you're still doing something. You can, you know, even if you end up streaming it just with no audio and it's just your reaction to it, like whatever it is, right? Like, you can do a bunch of things to get around even not having the rights to it. So I just think in general, like, this is one of the big threats to the kind of, you know, work that I do a lot now, which is obviously just the plain casting work, is that it can end from one sort of month to the next, and there's nothing you can really, like, if you have nothing else built up, that's it. So yes. I do agree on some level. The co-streaming route is actually probably way more attractive if you look a little bit into the future for a lot of people, which I think is kind of sad though in a way, because like, I think it's fun to have the tournaments with the crowds and with the people and like like that whole side of it. It's gonna suck if it all died, or if all the good people ended up going elsewhere, you know.
Yeah, I've got a few takes on this. Like, first of all, I will say, whenever I watch CS, one of the reasons I've found it very easy in all of history to do, like, watch parties and live views is because that's actually how I usually watch the game. I usually watch the game with, like, unironically no sound. And what I do is I just, like, you know, fucking either watch it or I have, like, someone on the second monitor when the round ends to look at. And the reason I do it is because I'm trying to actually analyse the game. Essentially, I don't want someone to talk because it's like they're fucking signal jamming me thinking at that point. I want to think what I'm thinking about the game. And I understand that phenomenon that people might know most famously from the UFC, see, where people do say that there are certain fights where the judges gave it to the person that looked like they were losing, but the reason you thought they were losing is because if you listen to Joe Rogan's commentary, he made it sound like they were losing. And sometimes it's true. If you ever go back and rewatch and you realise he has his own biases, sometimes you will be like, oh shit, if he hadn't have said like, oh, he's rocked there, I wouldn't have thought he had hit him. You know, it's like, so similarly, I've always tried to do like a super clean approach. But what's funny is, if I'm ever watching a match where it's like, I also want to watch it for fun, like an example would be if you had like the final of the major or like a big blast where it's like a ball of fucking best of five, like two teams I want to see. Sometimes I will actually intentionally watch it for entertainment. I can tell you, I actually for that prefer to watch the real broadcast. I want it to feel like sports at that point in time. I want it to have like the commentary. I want even the feel of professionalism. Somehow that does add to my feeling that this is epic. That's the key thing. It sets the stage that it's epic. I'll even say, if people don't know, even for things like League of Legends, I'm not the biggest fan of the game. I want to hear the real commentators though, and I want to hear the casting voice I've heard on all the other great moments. Because that's the one reason I was sort of also asking Anders, doesn't he think this sort of makes his job obsolete? Because here's one thing I think people really haven't thought about. You know, when we have these crazy moments, and in fact, in League, I can tell you they did this like for the World Finals. When Faker did some like amazing play in the 5th game, they did one of those ones where you show a bunch of the different core streams and broadcasts around the world. You show like each person's reaction, right? And I was thinking, yeah, that's cool. But imagine if there was no primary caster though. That means that like, yeah, it's cool to see someone go, oh my God, can you believe that? But you'll never have an Anders Blume iconic call. You'll never have Inhuman reactions. You'll never have Sadikist. It's the Big Apple and Snacks. You won't ever have those moments. And by the way, those are, I've always said this, that moment, the commentary is as associated with the play to be iconic as the players. Like my analogy would be, imagine a cinematic film that never had any like orchestral soundtrack. Like it wouldn't be as epic. You know it's both combined. It's the action on the screen has to be authentic and get you into it. But then if you put, you know, the Hans Zimmer, the fucking, those like soaring track, that takes it to like the ultimate level. And every iconic moment, you think you want it to be like that. So first of all, I do think we would lose something. We had no main cast and no like sports style broadcast. I also think as well, it just seems unnecessary. It has to be one or the other. To me, it always should have been both. You know what I mean? Because I always used to say back in the day, and this is why I will always admit I was wrong. I used to think back in the day, the dream broadcast, because it would have been for me, would be two casts. One would be Anders and someone else do like the traditional normie cast, and then the other one would be like me and Lurpus or someone do like a nerd cast, you know. But what I realised is that latter one is way too niche. Like, even if everyone on Reddit tells you they want it, they wouldn't really. They'd rather listen to the Inhuman reaction stuff. So what I realised is the second broadcast actually should be like this. It should be the fuck around behind the summit, beyond the summit, you know, home story cop style one. That's the obvious one where you bring in personalities and players and you cycle it around. And it's more like that's like the fucking around having a fun watch party, which everyone wants as well. Or you go to the main broadcast for professionalism. I think actually both have a place to play. But sadly, I do understand, as you're alluding to, I do get why for the TO, they're just thinking stuff like, well, I just get to have like popular people cast the game and they're just going to run all the costs for me and then I just don't pay these casters the money. And actually, I would say this as well. The other reason why, this is a bit of a cynical take, because I think all three people in this call have proven they can survive. But I'll tell you one other reason, and this is a real reason that's a negative if they get rid of real casting and real broadcasts. There are some very good people who work broadcasts right now who have put absolutely zero effort into building a personal brand or a stream, and they would have no job basically if this happens. Like, the difference is you guys, like Anders has done streaming over the years. Maui obviously literally has done the core streaming to make up for not having the events. Some of these people, they get, even though by the way they're good, but they just don't have the extra brand. At the moment, they rely on the old model of you get hired because someone at the TO likes you and appreciates your work. That guy is in a lot of trouble because a lot of those people do still live in the world. I also thought Anders phrased it very well. The point he was trying to make there was, if he does 7 events in a row, even if they're the best events ever, after event 7, it wasn't building anywhere. He's still, just like every other event, has to be hired for event 8. And if he isn't, he doesn't get to go forwards with it. Whereas as he's pointing out, Maui's right. If Maui does like core streams once every 3 months, it's not going to go anywhere. It's just going to stay at this level. But if he does it every event, it's going to gradually build into something crazy and it could get way bigger. And I can tell you, even the biggest core streamers in the world, because I'm friends with some of those guys in League that literally make like millions of dollars a year, even they at their level say, if you take one event off, sometimes you come back and the viewership halves and you immediately wonder, like, am I now going to spiral downwards? Like, am I going to lose everything? So that even the biggest guys are thinking that, mate. So I think it's actually way more sort of complex topic than people realize. It's also sort of about how media's changing, isn't it? Because I also do feel like, by the way, I'm actually ready for this to happen. It's so close to happening, guys. I guarantee you the next move is sports will become like this. I actually think for real. I've always said this, Maui. I never understood why Joe Rogan still does the real commentary. It's like, bro, just do that Fight Companion as a fucking watch party. I think that's what everyone wants anyway. They want you and your comedian friends and some celebrity, you know, rather than like in that scenario, someone else can still do the main cast. Like, I feel like this is like the future of sports. It's not just like it's CS or esports. It's like a media issue, right?
Like, I mean, like something that I thought about when we were doing the Elisa Masters stuff, right? Like, obviously, this is going to be, there were a bunch of reasons why this is hard to make work in reality, but like, it almost felt like if you could have sort of that desk and that kind of environment, but just for like as a co-stream for every other, you know, tournament in the year.
Sure,
obviously, the problem is you're not going to get the rights to do it. But in theory, if you could, then and actually just make it a business with them, right? Just say, we'll just revenue share with you guys for you know, for the rights for it. In a way, I think that would be a lot of people in the community would say, actually, I'm watching that, like that's great, or I'm watching both, you know, like I'm or at least I'm checking out highlights from the other one because I want to see what Duncan and Richard are doing or whatever. Like that kind of environment, I think could be like I think that's probably where things are going to move. Like you're probably right, like in a way that we'll have both on some level, but then here's another kind of issue which is a bit weird, just to. You know, over in Valorant, where Pansy and Hypoc are, you know, like they're casting some huge game and they're doing a fantastic job. And Tarek is, you know, is listening in. And, you know, I think the meme is, you know, he's like, oh, chat, what do you think about this? Whatever people say. And if you look at sort of the level of, not to shit on Tarek again, I really like him. And, you know, we obviously know each other in real life and all the rest of it. But like, the level of effort put into it is just so different. And the level of reward is unbelievably different, right? Like what Tarek is doing scales on a completely different like level. Whereas if you're working as a caster, not that you're not getting, I think we're getting paid a lot of money for what we do, but it's just you can't say, oh, but next month I want, like, I'm gonna, you know, have double the viewership, so I'm making double the money. Like that's not how the rates work, right? So just there is like a built-in, I don't want to call it an imbalance or anything. There's just like a built-in tension here that's going to be super weird going forward, you know.
No, I know what you mean. Like the obvious problem is if you're Pansy and Hypoc, you're doing like this insane professional cast where you're hitting all your beats, you've done your research. It is true. Then you look, and then the exact same viewership is Tarek just going. Like I always say, his watch parties are like you're just watching with a really high roommate, just going like, shit, that's crazy, man. It's like, bro, and then they just go, Tarek, sir, the Brinks truck's at the back door to back up with your payment for this cast today, like the $50,000. Like, it's like, if you're the casters, you're like, what am I even doing at this point in time? Like, this is hard work when I'm doing Tarek, and he's just rolling out of bed like, oh, what shit, man? Like,
I'll say before anybody just jumps into it, though, like you do need to have a brand associated with yourself to start co-streaming. Like you're not going to just start co-streaming tomorrow if you're a nobody in this space and just suddenly just get viewers. Like even if you do it for a year, like you're having a brand that's tied. Like one thing that it's helpful for Tarek is like, you know, he got into Valorant at a great time when he was a major winner in Counter-Strike, already had a big stream. Like the springboard was already like he was already mid-air. Like he didn't start from nothing on it. So it's not for everybody. I'll also just say that like there's just and like you said, the words of warning are very real with streaming. Like some days when I was doing it, I'm on for 8 hours and I'm just like locked in the whole time, you know, like sure, I'll walk away to go to the bathroom, obviously, but like it's very different than being a caster, where I will actually say this, like on the flip side, I think the caster role in some ways is the best for time allocation. Like you show up, sure, you can do a little bit of prep in the meantime, like 30 minutes of looking at some stuff, thinking about narratives, writing them down, whatever. But then you show up, you do the job and you're out. And usually you're just doing one BO3 a day. The co-streamer almost has to do both those games to be making these absurd sums of money, because or else people are just going to watch the other co-streamer and they're going to be like, why don't I just watch that other co-streamer for the whole day? Like the amount of time you do have to put in it's pretty unhealthy. Like, let's just say that. It's pretty unhealthy, and I'm not going to go as far to say, like, this is harder than 9 to 5 jobs. I don't think it necessarily is, because you're doing something that's fun, somebody that you love. But who was that guy? Yeah.
I mean, all I'm saying is, how many viewers do these people doing these so-called 9 to 5 jobs get? Exactly. Fuck all. One if they're lucky in the office. Maui's got thousands, you fucking peons. No, the one last thing I'll say as well. I'm amazed he's never thought to say this himself, because don't tell him, it probably blows ego up. But here's the craziest thing. Think about it, Anders. Didn't Richard Lewis actually invent watch parties / co-streaming with the No Majors Club? I think, you know, if you think of the timing, bro, that was like 9 years ago somebody started doing the No Majors. Something mad like that, wasn't it? So, in a way, I know, obviously he didn't brand it this this way, but he almost did invent co-streaming in a way.
Yeah. I think it's pretty close to it. Yeah. Now he's ruined it by being invited to the majors.
Exactly.
Yeah. Now I'm gonna fall off as a streamer. Honestly.
Exactly.
I'm gonna fall off just by working the actual event. My viewership will go down the next time I turn it on. Unfortunately.
Okay. Right now, Maui.
Okay.
It's time for Maui's bad point. So, what incredibly self-indulgent, idiosyncratic point only about your life would you like to highlight on this community talk show? Come on, what is it?
Hey. It's affecting more than just me.
Come
Okay?
on.
Obviously, I have the 3 a.m. call time tomorrow.
I can't believe he's actually made a point on the show and it's just like bitching about his own call time. I love it in a way though. It's good. It's on point. I
have the 3 a.m. call time because we're doing a Shanghai broadcast from Bucharest, Romania. So it's affecting me personally. But I will say, like, okay, I think it's bad that actually for a major, when I'm really thinking about it, this is why Valve did avoid doing Australia majors. You know, the Sydney crowd has always been fantastic, but having a primarily European and American audience watch something from that region is so difficult for them. Like, I don't even know if you guys can watch these games live, because like I don't
Some
even
of them
know
start at 7 a.m. for me, so no. The answer sometimes is no, 5 a.m. No,
yeah, exactly. you just got to watch it back. You just have to watch it back later because this is just an absurd time. And the viewership, and the thing is, I'll bring the numbers, okay? Because like, yes, this sounds like this is a point for me because it's like, oh man, this sucks, like having to wake up super early and everything like that. But in reality, it's the viewership for PGL stream is not solely affected by co-streamers. Like it's way lower than what it was in February of this year, where they were doing RMRs. Also, the average view count for February of this year for the Copenhagen RMRs was 29,000. Let's just say it was about 30,000 viewers throughout the entire RMRs on their channel over 110 hours. It's already been half the RMRs are over, with about 60 hours having been streamed, and the average view count is 14.7K. Like it's way lower. It's way lower. And yes, like the European RMR will probably bring in more viewers as time goes on in it, but it didn't start this badly. It didn't start with under half the average viewership for half of the time being streamed. And that's not also even because of co-streamers. Like ohnePixel isn't co-streaming, by the way. So it's like the biggest co-streamer right now isn't stealing their viewership. Like the biggest co-streamers right now are like olofmeister and Flom practically. And they're pretty big, but they're not stealing that many viewers from this, so I think this viewership, I think basically the bad point is that this major better actually capture the Chinese audience and bring a lot of them to this game and make some kind of positive impact, or the viewership of this major is kind of all for naught. And that's what's disappointing about it, because obviously this is hurting the primary core audience of Counter-Strike, which is Europeans in America and North America, or Americas.
I think it's worth. I think I would say that probably when Perfect World run events, they are really running them for the Chinese market, and that's really the only thing that they care about. And I'm not saying that in a bad way. I'm just saying that that's just their priority. That's just what they do. Like I've worked, I think, almost every single Perfect World event in the past, and you when you're there, you feel it as well. It's always been PGL doing the English side of the production, but you can tell that there's a very clear split between what is the Chinese side and the English side.
You're on the secondary one, right? You can feel it, right?
Yeah, 100%. And in a way, obviously, when you're used to the English broadcast being the main thing, we're the people in the room who really matter and blah blah, all the rest of it, it feels a bit weird. But in a way, I over the years I kind of just I just accepted that's obviously what it is. So if you come in with that expectation, it isn't that weird at all. You just realize that this is just made for a different market, and in some sense I think it kind of does make sense. I just think you just have to suspend your feeling that you are the primary target for this and realize that that's not going to be the case. And this is, I don't know how much people know about this, but if you want to publish games or software in China, you need to have a Chinese publisher. And I think in gaming, there's probably only one or two. I think I can't remember what the other one is, but Perfect World's one. I think famously Blizzard at one point fucked up their contract with the Chinese audience, and they just couldn't release their games in China at all.
Yep, exactly. NetEase, I think it was called,
So I'm sure for Valve, this is such an easy thing to agree to. Perfect World do the publishing. Yes. They get one event a year. This time it was a major. I just think it's. I don't think it's even more complicated. I think it's just a small concession to make, and it just makes sense. I think I would say if you're a European or American audience member, just try and remember, in some sense, the primary show just isn't really for you, and in a way that's okay, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, but you're right. It would be sick if obviously if on the other side, like that would be a massive win for everybody if now we had like a massive pickup in Chinese audience. Like that, I agree. Like that's the part that would be super sick.
That's actually the point I was going to bring in, which is the problem I have with this is in actual practice, how it's applied now, I'm with Maui. It's annoying for me because obviously I'm in the main region for Counter-Strike and I'm not used to having a game start at 5 a.m. local time. Like that's essentially almost I mean, look, I actually obviously don't do like a real world job, so I could make myself stay up to learn. But that's probably the worst time for me as well. Like I could wait up to 1 a.m. for a game. I could watch a game at 10 p.m. I could watch a game at 10 a.m. maybe. You've picked almost the only window that's like the worst possible one. That's surely when I'm going to have to sleep is between 5 and 7 a.m. surely. Like so I will say for me that is a bomber. And my bigger issue is this: it's just that thus far I've done this rant before, so I won't do it again. Basically, I don't believe, unfortunately, that we're ever going to get a large audience or player base in China or Korea, just because of things I know from games like League of Legends and Dota and how they have or haven't succeeded. People don't know Dota, the other Valve game, has completely also failed, except in China. It didn't get much presence in Korea, whereas in Korea, obviously famously, they love League of Legends. It's still the number one game in the PC cafes. And League of Legends successfully captured both markets. If people don't know, Korea and China are the biggest markets in the game. Now, here's the problem. In League of Legends, people actually make the same complaint, believe it or not, because again, we're all in our own little myopic world, often in our own perspective. So there are people who will complain when they hold, like, you know, worlds in League of Legends in like China. They'll be like, what the hell, you know, in North America or Europe, I have to watch it at this time. But the difference is, Anders, it's easy to say what you would just say there. You can just say to them, well, actually, in this game, you might not be aware of this, there's more viewership in China than there is in America. So, for example, in that game, actually, it makes perfect sense you'd cater to them. And as you say here, you're also just like supplying all the world's audience with, throughout the circuit, different events they can all watch at normal times, assuming the average audience guy does go to school or does do a job and can't do what we could do, wait up to 5 a.m. if we chose to and just made ourselves twist our schedule. The problem, obviously, in CS is I just don't know yet if it'll ever get there. But I also sort of agree with Anders. If you have a business relationship with these people, this is a very easy quid pro quo thing of like, you're doing this for me, I give you this back in return. As you say, I actually think also, this is one of the areas we've also got to sort of realise Valve doesn't see the game the way we do, right? They don't see majors as like this enormous thing we do where it's like the greatest shit of all time. They just sort of see it as like a good tournament, like they help fund part of. And, you know, I think to them it's more here, you know, here today, gone tomorrow. Whereas to me, I am thinking like historically, like, oh, will people remember this major? They're maybe not operate on that level, so I sort of get it. I don't hate it. Yeah. I'm obviously not a fan either, but again, I'm not the fan in China, am I? So I imagine he had a very different opinion.
And unfortunately, like, I think the thing is that, like, I just looked at the time in Shanghai when the broadcast finished today. It was 8 p.m. You know, like, we're running tournaments.
You could have got a bit later then, right?
Yeah, you could easily start it a couple hours later. Sure. It's not, like, yeah, that's a main thing. Like, because I think it's reasonable to say people could be up at 9 a.m. watching a game in Europe, you know, like... So that it doesn't even feel like it's a huge adjustment in my eyes, but you know, maybe some work laws in China make it so you can't work after 9 p.m. or some shit.
Obviously, the joke there is, except for Stewie 2K's ancestors, that would be a disgraceful time to have watched the game. 9 a.m.
Yeah, it's way too early. Way too early.
Anyway, my bad point is actually a framing one. It's a narrative one. Obviously, that's the only thing I care about. Right? I'll do a little bit of setup. It goes like this. Right? Basically, if you think about how CS used to work, Anders will know this from back in the day. One of the best things about CS back in the day was it was incredibly straightforward. Like, if you ever went back and watched where I'm like making a video where I predict, oh, they should sign this guy. Most of the time, I don't have any inside info. That's just the obvious player you should sign. Like, if you're Astralis and you need a player and it's like 27, you should probably get Config or Magus. They're really good. Like, they're the obvious slam dunk. So back then, one of the best things about the scene was it sort of made sense. Like, the best players get to the best teams. The best teams make the change when it makes sense. Like, when they start failing, they make the cut. Or, by the way, when they're succeeding, they hold off on the cut. Everything sort of had like a sort of, it was like comforting that it sort of had like a time and a season that played out in an orderly manner. Basically, my bad point I've phrased as, we are in an era where dead lineups win lands. Like, think about this, guys. So you know the story about Vitality. That's true. They won IEM Cologne this season, and they already, before they won it, had all these disputes. People could have been in and out. You've had, this season, G2 has won both of the blasts, and everyone knows Nico is leaving. In fact, it's even been confirmed by the CEO. And based on that info about Spinks or whoever it is in Vitality, there's going to be a change there, right? This is the framing of what's bad. It's one thing if a lineup comes or goes, right? First of all, we violated all the old rules. Back in the day, what would my joke have been about Snacks, every time he wins one of these lands, he just bought himself another 3 months. That's not even how it works now. Like with these lineups, they can, as far as I can tell, even if they win the major, Nico's probably leaving. So the reason I put this as a bad point is, one, I find that really jarring anyway. Like, it's kind of weird to see a team win an event. Because remember, for the international events like a Blaster and Cologne, I'm supposed to be able to sort of say, is this the best team in the world? It's like, bro, even they don't think that, and they would change tomorrow if they could. In fact, they would rewind time and not even play the land with this lineup. And then lastly, the reason I'll say I think this is definitely bad in light of the fact we're about to qualify to the major, consider this world, guys. There's an entirely plausible world where the final of this major could be G2 against Vitality, and it doesn't matter who wins, and it doesn't matter who loses, both lineups are changing. Like, that's just kind of like, that throws off to me a lot of the narrative storytelling. Like I say, if you win, I want it to be like, right, well, I can't wait to see them at the next event, not just like, oh, there is no next event, yeah, they're going to change rosters. Or if you win, I also want to believe it's like you believe in this squad, you've all got the same flow. I don't want it to be like, they're just playing because it's a dead team and they fucked around, there was no pressure and they won the event. I feel like it's kind of like, to me, I also get the feeling, if you look up the way people are responding to these wins, no one does seem to rave, like no one's going, can G2 be one of the historical all-time? Because everyone knows the story doesn't go that far. The story ends after this chapter. So what do you guys think? Because as someone who likes narratives, I find this a bit jarring. I find it kind of throws off some of the feel of the story, as it were. Like, it makes it not feel like the people have their own agency as a lineup or whatever.
Like, I wonder a little bit if this is like the late consequence or the long tail of the international lineup revolution that happened at one point, right? Where like FaZe started to say like, okay, we can just get like all the best players. It doesn't matter if they're from any different country. We can just make it happen. And the cool thing about that is obviously it unlocks like a new caliber of team that before then, if you had to get like only French or only German or only Danish players, only Swedish players, would have been harder to do. Like now you can just like, pick up someone and just move them in here and make it all work. Yes. And like people don't remember this, but that was a really big discussion, like point people had, like, can these lineups work? Because won't you sacrifice communication? Like people didn't know before it really happened. But now we know it can happen. And actually these teams are super successful and it's really sick. But I think two things happen when you do it. And one, the one that's been talked about for a while, I think, is that people don't care about international teams the way they do about national teams. Like, you are just always going to have more of an impact on you if you have an all-American lineup. Like, we're all shouting USA in the crowd. Like, it just feels great. Sure. And having one American player on a team and pretending like it's a full American team is not the same thing. Like, it just somehow isn't. And so there is like already some sort of audience buy-in thing that gets lost a little bit when you have these teams. Also because the teams are not building any brands around they're just players. But like you said, next week it's a new lineup anyway, yes. So nobody really, like, there's no emotional investment. But maybe the other side of it is this feeling that maybe, so if you have like an all day, if you can only pick Danish players to make your team, at some point everyone has to make a concession and say, there might be a better player somewhere out there, but these are the players that we have, and we have to make it work. Like, these are the best players in the country we can get, and we're just going to have to power through all the problems that we have and try and make it work no matter what. And in a way, I think that gives you like a commitment to the thing. You're like, we're playing this tournament right now. It really matters. And I guess maybe now, if you're like, the only way now you can find that same level of, lack of stress is that the team is already dead. Like, you could kind of say, oh, well, nothing really matters. Like, I'm just playing the Counter-Strike the best that I can. I'm just having like a really good, whereas I think in other contexts, you look at Falcons, the sort of the level of pressure and the expectations way outgrow what they could do. Like, the only way that Falcons could have lived up to the expectations was if they just came out and won almost everything, like, right off the bat, So there might be something. It actually sort of does make sense to me that some of these teams, one, are almost performing better by the time you know that they're basically dead, because that's like the moment you're sort of like freed up as a player to do it. And the other time that they would have been performing really good in the past would have been when you were really sure that you had like the 5 best players of your country together, and you're just gonna have to make it work because there's nobody else there. So like, I do think, I don't know what the solution is, but I think that it is interesting. I trace it back to that switch with the international lineups. I don't know about you guys, but
I would say that the obvious joke is that the dead team buff has been studied and now its power is being harnessed to the nth degree.
Okay.
But
so in this analogy, Pekka is like a fucking necromancer supreme who just, he just uses these dead entities to win the championship. He's actually brought Snacks Frankenstein back. Like, he's alive! They just winning lands for no reason at the end. Okay, fair enough.
Tell people on day one, the team's dead, guys.
Exactly, yeah.
I mean, I think that it's just a shame to the scene that that everybody is prepping for this Falcons assembly of superstar players, and now it's basically the worst kept secret that all these different players are moving to all these other rosters. All of the, I guess, S tier orgs are poaching from the A tier orgs. You know, it's just that everybody's kind of moving up the ladder right now in a way that it's probably a little bit unnatural because Falcons is coming in with such an absurd amount of cash right now and is able to buy anybody that they so choose. And I just feel like because of that, it's just thrown a lot of things out of whack. And so I kind of think that once the dust settles, though, that it's going to be a lot better. But you're right, that this season has been really awkward because G2 have won a couple of events. They might even win the major. In fact, I'd say that they might even be the favorites of the major at this point.
Why not?
Yeah. So I'd say they are. Actually, you know, I'll just go on record. They are my favorites to win the major now. Like I picked Vitality before it, but after seeing G2 at the World Finals, I'm like, I don't know how this team loses because you don't even have to call well, and you're going to be able to win tournaments. So beyond that, yeah, I think once the dust settles in the following season and Falcons have the lineup that they actually want, and everybody has to work with the pieces that are available to them, then we can start talking about it. I'm hoping, you know, I'm being optimistic about this whole thing.
I know what you mean, though, because here's the thing. Back in the day in sports, when there was a similar thing happen, people cared about their brand more than they cared about the club or whatever. There's a famous saying, people often said that was quite cool. They used to say, it's supposed to be about the badge on the front of the shirt, not the name on the back. It's not supposed to be about you. Now, speaking of shirts, what about Into the M? That they could help you out with your shirt, because we always obviously advertise this particular company. I'm wearing one of them right now. I've got this one where it's sort of like a Japanese like stick design. It's kind of like a cool like rising sun or whatever. It's kind of cool. They have loads and loads of different designs. They have plain tees. If you don't know, they have the print ones like this. They have all sorts of merch. They have a massive website, by the way. And not only that, they constantly bring out like new collections and update like the designs and stuff. It's not the same stuff just for years and years and years. And what's cool is, as well as like the usual thing of like they're really good fabrics, they wash quite well. I actually think the designs, I like the more like understated ones like this, where it's not like some crazy over the top ones. They also, as I said, have the plain ones, but they've also got, unsurprisingly, a massive sale going on because it is the Into the AM Black Friday / Cyber Monday sale. So if you know already Into the AM, first of all, when you use our link there, intotheam.com/LFN, you always save 10% anyway, and they always actually have bundles on. Like they have 3 graphic tees for $61.95, they have 3 basic tees for $52.95. But if you take part during the Black Friday / Cyber Monday deal, their code will stack not only our 10%, but you will get up to 60% off everything on the store. So if you just go across the store, you'll see on the different items what you get off, etc. It's between the 13th of November and the 8th of December, so you've got loads of time. By the way, very good gift also to buy for some friends, family members, etc. Again, when you're a kid, you think clothes is like whack to get as a gift. Actually, when you're an adult, like some nice clothes is actually a nice thing to receive. That's actually maybe better than someone gambling on a book or a DVD. I said DVD because I come from the old days, that you don't even know if you're going to like, do you? Don't even know what you'd buy. I don't know, a streaming gift card from a petrol station. So I can't get out of the old world. I live in a 1980s Paul Verhoeven movie, not a real future. So it's all good. So basically, to bring it all back, you can click in the description box the link intotheam.com/LFN. Get not only 10% using our code off anything on their store, but during the Black Friday / Cyber Monday sale, you can get up to 60% off selected items. So go check out there. Maui's got them as well. We've all used it. It's all great stuff. Shout out to the Into the M, and especially shout out to everyone who actually does use that. Use the link, use the services, get the savings, because loads of people have actually bought items from Into the M. So it's one of the main things that's like helping fund our company. So shout out to everyone. We only vet the things that we think are legit and bring them before you. Right, back into the topic is, of course, we were going to do the ugly section now. So Anders, what do you find ugly in CS at the moment?
Well, before I get that, I was just clicking through the website of the shotgun. That actually does look banging. Like I'm gonna remember. I will check it out. Okay. Good stuff.
Well, thanks for that totally authentic testimonial there.
Yeah. Well,
I didn't tell him to say that, guys. He chose to say that himself. It's all good.
You didn't. No, I was just, so long, you kept.
And I'll just throw this out there. Any company on the internet, Anders very much does like to be sponsored by people and have lovely gifts sent to him and then tell the world about them. So anyone out there who wants to sponsor Anders, also just hit him up. Just contact him immediately.
Yeah, send me a DM. I'm ready. My ugly point is that the tier 2 and tier 3 talent space in Counter-Strike, I'm sure it's true in other games too, but I'm just talking about the one that I know about. is kind of a mess of people undercutting each other to try and get more work. And I think that's going to slowly creep into the tier 1 space as well. And it's turning into a bit of a disaster.
These guys, like fans, I'm just going to level you. These guys didn't do their homework. Then 1 minute before, they were like, shit, what do I like? Now he's like, fucking get up early. That's fucking whack. Anders is like, all these bloody tier 2 people charging half my price. Like, these points are so self-indulgent. Okay, hit me with it, though, Anders. It is your area of expertise. What's going on? Is the tier 2 space wild? Are they all? Is it savages just all undercutting each other or something?
It is, yeah. They are savages. They're exactly right. It's the Wilton is where it's like, you know, kill or be killed, like EOB kind of situation. Like
it's the road, basically. Okay.
The funny thing is, I have actually known and heard about this for a while now.
Oh, sure, yeah.
So it's not like it just sort of dawned on me.
I mean, pretty sure, Anders, I'm not even really in the talent scene, and every time I ever do an event or talk to people about events, it's always a different person. But every couple of years, there's always one person who's like a semi-famous tier 1.52 caster, where the rumor is they just literally charge half of what everyone else does, or something insane like that, right? It's basically always like in the circle. There's always a name circulating, right, that people are aware of. Yeah,
and the truth is, like, there could be. Like, it's very hard to draw a distinction between, like, when are you undercutting and when are you just pricing yourself, like, a little bit lower in the amount. Like, these are, like, super hard distinctions, so I'm not, you know... Like, it is very hard, and obviously it's also a reflection of the fact that it still feels like, even in spite of the fact that everyone seems to think we're, like, out of the esports recession or the esports winter or something. I'm not so sure. Like, it feels like... It doesn't feel like that. It feels like
things... it's still going on in it, yeah.
Yeah, it's still constricting, like, I think more than people maybe realize. And obviously that makes people super nervous and pressured a lot, and the downside kind of is, like... Obviously, it's hard to make this call if you are the person who has to make a choice right now. Like, do I want to accept a little bit less money, but then I actually get paid at all? Or do I kind of want to have, like, a longer view of saying, well, if we all keep doing this, eventually it's like a spiral going down. Like, everyone's getting paid less and less and less until, like, we're just all, you know, going to be co-streamers instead. It's hard to really say, but I can just see that it's slowly coming. Like, I've heard more and more about it. And I'm talking to more and more companies. I had a couple of companies I was talking to in the last couple of months who said, yeah, they didn't appreciate paying people like travel dates, which I think for all the time that I've been working in the industry has been just a completely...
Oh, wait, so it's not just that the TOs, like, you know, enjoy someone charging less. They're now actually sort of making this more the standard. It's potentially pushing back some of the sort of hard-fought territory, potentially.
Yeah.
Right.
Really saying like, oh, well, we, you know, as a policy, we don't pay people for travel. And
holy shit.
And just to say, like, Semler and I had to fight to stop people from living in the same hotel room. Like, Semler and I, for the first many events, would both be in the same room, and you know, like, so, you know, him and I are sleeping like back to back in, like, you know.
Mate, I had some mad ones where I was an analyst where I would just get assigned, like as I was at fucking boarding school, just get assigned a person to share a room with me as I'm doing like a major. And by the way, this wasn't even always someone working the event. I've done majors where someone who was just at the event in like a booth or something was just rocking at like 3 a.m, just coming in drunk, like, and I'm like, I have to wake up in like 4 hours and do the fucking major, mate. Like, no, back in the day, it was super, like, essentially we had none of the luxuries, did we? We had none of this shit.
Yeah, and you know, and those were like things that had to be pushed for and had to be, you know, like negotiated for to try and sort of and win those over. And the problem is, on some level, like, not to say that it's like a constant fight all the time. I actually kind of hate the idea, because this is what happens a lot. Is people, it turns into sort of like us versus the TOs kind of thing, and I think that's super not productive. But the problem is, on some level, if things either, like, they almost either have to go up or down. Like, it's super unlikely that they just kind of stay the same. And once they start to go a little bit down, if people don't find a way to kind of like to look a little bit further ahead, then it's going to just keep going down for everyone. Like, if everyone starts saying, oh, I don't have to get paid for travel days, well, then in that case, like, no one else can either eventually, right? Like, because you're just going to be told eventually, well, wait a minute, like, all your colleagues aren't, you know, asking for anything for these days, so we're not obviously going to pay. And it just kind of, it gets worse. So you're right, it is super self-indulgent, but I think it's another sign of this situation that's currently happening in esports in some sense. And I think I think it already is ugly in the tier 2 and 3 space. I think it has the potential to become really ugly if it sort of spirals from there, and it kind of, I don't see why it wouldn't. Like, a lot of the people in the tier 2 space are really good. They're really cool to work with. They're super talented. There's no reason they couldn't end up in the tier 1 space, right? But then, you know, they're going to... essentially, the same culture will bring it... Because if that's how you get there, then why would you stop? Sure. And again, it's not really to criticize anyone. Like, it is just... like, those are hard decisions to make. Like, I would find it hard to make these decisions if if it was a really pressing issue for me, where it's like, well, if I don't work these next 3 events, I can't pay the bills, so I have to just accept less because otherwise I'm screwed, you know?
Sure.
Like, what do you do? I don't know, but I think the industry is facing some interesting problems there. So, yeah.
Yeah, it sets a horrible precedent if you think that this is going to be your career, if you're a talent coming up and you are severely undercutting the other people in the space. And it's just setting everything back. Like, everything that you and Semler worked towards really did elevate the quality of life and really just like making it a sustainable living. Like, I feel like the talent, like when you compare all of the numbers of like who's really doing well in a lot of these spaces, like the players are obviously getting paid exorbitant amounts of money, along with the prize money that they're getting too. And I feel like the again, it's like one of those things where it's like the draw for being a coach streamer and everything becomes stronger when so many of these, like the tier 1.5, tier 2 talent are just going for these undercut rates because they just don't actually think that the merit of their work is actually valuable enough that they should be competitive in terms of rate. And that's something that's very frustrating. And it's kind of telling about the person, but it also kind of leads to that it's like, what do they expect when they get more gigs and get to the top? Are they going to like be able to push for higher, or are they just going to find themselves slotted there with this subpar C- level rate, and then they just can't move up because it's like, well, the quality of your work doesn't really merit it, and you instead of actually improving at the actual job you're doing, you try to just undercut, and now you're stuck here. So are you really winning in the end? That's the big question to the people that do that stuff.
No, I know what you mean. I'll actually pick up on that last point there. I actually think probably the worst thing about the undercutting approach is, it's like you said, Anders. If someone just didn't know, like maybe they're just fresh to the scene, or maybe they just don't think like the rate should be that high. Maybe, I don't know, maybe in their company they don't need as much living money or whatever, right? Maybe someone charges just naively, it's their first year. That's fine. But I think the people who sort of know what they're doing, like they're sort of willingly accepting this bargain, I think it's a Faustian bargain, mate, because I think in the long run it doesn't even help you. Like as Maui just said there, I've known people, this is absolutely, in the short term boosted their career, and in the long term it's been a crazy like inertia against them. I mean, I won't name names, but I think you guys would know who I'm talking about. If I said in the last, I'll make it wide, I'll make it like, let's say in the last 6 to 7 years, there was a casting duo who I think simultaneously undercut and also were viewed as like a tool that a TO could use against other casting duos. And there was a period where these looked like the biggest casters in the world. They were doing all the big events. And then as soon as it got back to sort of like the normal world of events, I noticed that TO didn't even use those as their main casters, sometimes didn't even invite them to massive tournaments. And part of the reason why is it's almost like the TO himself bought the idea, like, oh, you're going to charge less, then you are less valuable. And so what he did is, it like when it was cynically benefiting him, like he needed to crush the costs and margins, he hired you. But then when he got his real budget, he was sort of like, right, well, I'm not buying the cheap meal, I'm going to go for the top of the menu again. He went back to the top. So I also think the problem is you will set in the mind of that TO, like this isn't a one-time thing. Like I can get this guy at this rate, or I can at least sort of sway him towards always being less than what he wants and always being a few €100 under. And also I can do this thing of like, I know he's desperate to work the events, so maybe I do 2 events, then the third one I ask him to take even less, and he has to now because he wants to do that. I think you also, as a talent, it's a really dangerous game to play. Like we're making it sound as though, you know, these people are just winning and it's just that collectively everyone gets less money. I think even they get fucked over. Don't you think so, Anders? I would say in the long run it's a hard game to play as well.
Well, also because if you, in a way, if you make your way to the top by undercutting other people, you have such an intimate understanding of how you're going to get replaced one day, which means you really can't, you're not going to be able to raise your rates at the end because someone's just going to say, well, you know, if you want more, then, you know, we'll have to reconsider our options. And you know what that means. Like, you don't have to say more. They're just like, oh, that's it. I'm actually at the limit already.
Yes.
And there's another side to this. Like, I would say, so some of the events that I go to, not that I know specifically what her numbers are, but I know if somebody hires Shocks, for instance, from League, she is going to get paid way more than me. And I understand exactly why. Like, her brand is giant. Like, I'm not complaining about it. In fact, I think it's great because, one, it makes my day rate look more reasonable. And also, it like in a way, she is helping to sort of push the path forward. You know, like she's actually like, you know, increasing the ceiling somewhat, right? So it works the other way too, right? Like we actually need people to go the other way a little bit, so it doesn't become this like weird race to the
The
bottom.
joke there being Anders just discovered, Maui, what it's like to feel like you undercut someone. He's like, oh, I'm charging less actually, so how does this work? What's going on? The delta between our day rates.
Well, I'll say this. So I've always been I never know how much I should try and...
All of it. Tell us it all. Come on.
The issue is like I do wonder if it makes me like I don't know, like a not a dangerous person, but I wonder if it could backfire in some way, because I don't know how many people know this, but Semler and I were really quite aggressive in the beginning of Counter-Strike, like to like renegotiate our rates a lot. And part of the reason, obviously, straightforwardly, we just wanted to get paid more money for what we're doing. Like, there's no question about that. Also, we had no idea like what the limits or anything were, right? And I am not like an economist, but I had this basic philosophy, which is like, well, eventually, if we keep asking, then there will be some sort of market that will tell us enough is enough, right? Like, so as long as if we keep asking and no one says no, then we haven't found that market yet. Like, I was trusting in some blind force to make that kind of true. And obviously that did happen eventually. But by the time we hit that ceiling, I started talking to other people who like, or actually they came to me and similar, and they said like, hey, how much are you guys getting paid per day in Counter-Strike? This was Deficio from League, and it was, he was part of NIP when I was, and it was Melk and Cinderin from Dota. And these people discovered that they were getting really underpaid in these other games, like by a lot. And they, obviously, once they had that information, and my logic was, because I guess in a way we could have said, well, we fought really hard for this. It's kind of our achievement, and you guys have to sort of make it in. But my thought was, well, if they know and they can increase the situation on their side, and they can even surpass us, you could make an argument that league casters should get paid more, right?
Yeah, of course.
But so if they do that, then maybe it'll sort of spill over back into our world eventually in the future, even if it's not right now. So that was my logic for saying, of course, we're going to have to like talk to them and say and find a way. So in a way, I think we managed to instigate kind of like a huge rising in both those other games, and I don't know how much it spilled over to everything else. But the problem is like it can go the other way too, right? And I think that's the thing that people are maybe a little bit blind to, or maybe people are just desperate. But either way, I think it's yeah, it has the potential to turn weird, you know.
I will say as well, like I can actually touch on that a little bit, because obviously from knowing Monty, he was one of the people in League who also went and talked to all of you guys in every other game and sort of took like a survey of what are the industry rates. And quite famously, he had some public battles with Riot where he like turned down an event. It was like mid-season invitationals, like the second biggest event, because they wouldn't pay like what he thought was a reasonable rate. Like they were basically paying almost like tier 1.5 CS money, but for like the second biggest event in like the biggest game in the world. So to him, it was like it was worth taking a stand over. But the problem, the reason why I bring that up is this, because I actually think it would have shocked a lot of people, Anders, if we went back to the early days of CSGO. I've done this publicly. I once told someone basically, well, like, if you know that guy who works for Riot, he actually works for Riot again now, Jat, who was like a main caster guy there. He's he's basically like essentially like the Yanko of League, if people don't know. He's been like there the whole time almost. He's one of the main people. You'd always hire, he's mega. But I can tell you, there was a time period where I used to do events as my side gig, and my side gig was paying more than his full-time salary for the whole year of doing League of Legends, a game that was like 5 times bigger. Like, I remember thinking, like, that's what happens when you get locked into a circuit where people don't know you can actually negotiate the rates, because you can't. You're only negotiating against one party there, Riot. And even worse, they can sort of have the ultimate leverage, which is we're the only game in town. So actually, if you don't accept my rates, it's the other way around. It's not like, do I have to pay you and get you to come? If you don't come, because you don't do the event, you no longer have a job. You just don't exist anymore. There's no second event to go to look as sick, which obviously sometimes in CS we did get. There's like a negotiating factor. You could go to the rival or the event like a week after. So first of all, it's worrying, because anytime you get that, you absolutely can get a monopoly and like a locked-in system where actually it'll be everyone's rates get slashed then, because then it just becomes like, here's what we pay. You accept it or you don't, and I'll get the next guy. Secondly, I also do think it just makes the events worse, because now what's really determining who's going to work this event isn't how good is this person and do I think he'll fit my broadcast. It's things like, I can just make the budget work by hiring this guy for cheap to offset this other famous guy. But a fan doesn't know that. He assumes you're picking your dream team of casters and talents, and these are the best in the world. And then lastly, I'll just say this. One of the reasons I understand why it happens, though, Anders, is actually, unfortunately, one of the things that sort of kills, like, broadcast in esports, which is the reason we all, back in the day, accepted barely any money and, you know, just a hotel room sharing with someone. And wow, they're even going to pay all the flights. It's because back in the day, even if you were ex-player, it was cool to do the event, wasn't it? It was cool to work. There was the novelty of it. The problem is that can't be the world we're in, or we're always going to be in a stunted, arrested state of development. If you actually want people to be commentators and talents on the level of like inside the NBA or like the best sports commentators, they have to do it as like a full-time job where they commit their life to it. And in the same way as the TO who pays you half the money wouldn't let you just come on and fuck around and just be laughing and not doing his job, you have to apply yourself seriously. So they should have to pay for a serious rate for the sort of person who can do that. Because you can say that thing Richard does, like it's a young man's game. What that really means is you'll put up with anything when you're 21 and you just want to be part of the scene. But I'll tell you what, the guy who's 21, I'm just going to say it now, could never be what Anders is today. Because he's only 21 and inexperienced. Anders wasn't as good at the beginning. By the way, pick anyone you think's the best. If you think Sadikis was the best, I was there when Sado began. He probably took 2 years to get cooking. Everyone takes time. And you need things like event after event, regular work. You need to work with other people. You need to push yourself. You can't really do what I think TOs do think you can do. They really do act like we're all interchangeable. And it's just like making a fantasy team. Oh, I'm just going to use my 500 to pick this guy instead of that guy. That does work in the short term. But if you want like the best talent to be professionals at this and really good, because I do think it's a bit like in-game leader. Being a commentator or broadcast talent, the experience scales. The more you do it, the better you can also potentially get, assuming you dedicate yourself. So you can't really be the guy where it's just up in the air, like, who's working the next event? Like, oh, this guy's going to do it for 500, it's him, just some no-name guy. Like, that will actually make, I think it actually just makes it worse for everyone, by the way, like I said. Okay.
Yeah, I think yeah, I was going to say, like, I think maybe one thing to kind of consider, which, you know, not to defend the TOs too much, but I think something that is, I could totally see that if I got hired tomorrow as like the talent liaison for, you know, EFG or Blast or Riot or anything like that, and I was now the person who had to hire people, immediately I would be totally honest. My concern would also be, man, if we have these couple of people that we built up to a super high level, and now we're really dependent on them, meaning we can't really do the show without them. Like they're so important that we know that we sort of have to hire them. Then we lose all negotiation. Like we have no leverage in the conversation. So I totally understand why it is a concern if you're a TO. It's just that whatever we're landed at now is weird. Like it's like we're in this place where it is like almost sort of a hostile relationship, and it shouldn't be, because obviously casters want work, or analysts want work, and TOs want like a good product, and we're trying to build that together. Like it should be more of a corporation than it is now, where it's more of like a, you know, like one side holds a lot of power, the other side, you know, is in this sort of like there's some weird shit going on there that isn't good for the future, is I think what it boils down to. But I understand their position as well.
No,
I don't think they're not just evil and like they're not like fuck these people, or like that's not what's happening here. It is just a kind of a weird environment. So.
Right, go on then, Maui. What is your ugly point?
Mine is probably the biggest splash on Twitter in the last 10 days or so. And I feel like the way that sides were taken on the DRILLAS substitution drama just tore this community apart in a way that. By
the way, a team that didn't even qualify through an RMR, but as you said, you're tearing me apart. I think it's destroyed the whole community. It's mentally out.
I mean, it was great. I had to block so many people for making a joke tweet about it. You know, like because people were just like going at my throat because they associate me with Richard.
By the way, I hope people know as well that's not real. Whatever that stupid post said, there's no way Richard Lewis banned like 3,500 accounts. Hey, what level of industrial skill blocking device do you guys imagine he has? Like, there's no way. He might have blocked like 300. How many gets? It's not like 3,500. That almost made it funnier though. It made me laugh. I know. Yeah, it made the story better. You are right. It's true.
Like I blocked a dozen people. You know, like it's pretty.
Like, why do they make it seem like Richard Lewis is like his blocking device is like an anti-aircraft gun? He's like,
yeah,
I know. It's so absurd. I know.
Either way, I just want to. I think like this whole issue just needs a well-rounded take. So I'm gonna attempt to give one here on the fly. Like I just think like at the start to go through the Middle Eastern qualifier to make it through the Asia RMR is already like it's already a fun story. It's also kind of warping the rules a little bit of what's possible there. I mean, you had 2 Israeli players, you had Haji, who has a dual citizenship for Morocco and France, and then you have 2 European players. And then to identify that you could, or to then figure out you could get a sub on your roster who is European, and then just say, okay, we're cutting one of the guys that qualifies our team to even play that qualifier. That's a fault of Valve. Like, that's a fault of the rule set here, more than I do think that it's a bit slimy to do that, because it strips away the essence of what is at play here, which is that there are these essential, I know people hate this term, but I got to think of a better way to say this so people, it doesn't trigger people. Like, what is essentially an affirmative action tournament to go for, you know, the Asia RMR, like, to basically, it's, you know, like, I need a better way.
You do. Here's the problem. I even know what you mean. It makes sense. It's just, again, of all the terms, like, it's like in many ways, the sort of climate in CS, the way it's changing is, you know what, I don't believe in climate change. You know, what are you doing? Like,
yeah,
it's all good. We get it. He doesn't mean in that way, guys. He just means in CS. It's all good. It's all good.
But the thing is, like, I actually would stand up for the idea that these regions that have less opportunities, that can't actually punch up into the Valve rankings as easily, should be given some sort of, I guess, step ladder to get a little bit higher up, because I think it's important for the health of the game that these other the Americas region and the Asia region aren't necessarily given the same prize pool and the same tools to succeed as the European space right now. So so the fact that DRILLAS found a loophole to play with essentially like a 4-man European lineup in what is supposed to be an Asian qualifier, and had a chance to take a spot away from the Asia region, which at this point, like, there's not a lot going for it. They don't have a lot of opportunities. They don't have a lot of ways to make prize money, which is an essential part of the Valve ranking system. Like, you need prize money to vault yourself into the higher, like the top 32 ranks of the Valve ranking system. And if there's not enough prize money, then it should just be those teams, because there's less to go around there. That's just how it is. So I think there's like two, like maybe 3 parts to this whole thing that I want to break down. One, Richard's point to me was just that he was disgusted by the loophole that was being invoked here, and he might have it out for ohnePixel in a way.
Yeah,
I'm not gonna get into that
I just thought he fucks with that sort of core streamer anyway, does he?
Yeah, it took a jab at Oni, whatever. I'm not gonna comment on that. I think Oni's okay for the scene, honestly. Beyond that, then 2, I think that there was probably always going to be a team that tried to exploit this, and so it's good that it's figured out now. Like, I'm glad that it's figured out now, that we're seeing a demonstration in action. And I actually, almost in a way, because they figured this out through a loophole, I actually kind of think that it's good that they weren't rewarded for it directly by getting sticker money. And then 3
would also been a bigger drama if they'd actually qualified, right? The fact they didn't makes it not as big a deal, isn't it? You know, true.
Yeah, and I feel like, well, okay, those are the 2 main points. I don't even need to get into a third.
Go on, then. What do you think, Anders?
Have to say?
Yeah, it's hard to add. I think it's hard to add more to it. Like, it is hard not to eventually say it probably is the fault of Valve for the loophole being available to begin with. I do kind of wonder, like, I think, was there like a real chance that the stickers would have just been like owners faced in?
Yeah, it was implied that what it was going to be. Yeah, as far as I know. Yeah,
I guess that's not the most important part, but in a way that obviously would have been something that would have been triggering to probably a lot of people, because it would have felt like the loophole was just like, you know, super self-indulgent. Here's you know, just to run with it a little bit, something that is so interesting to me is that for DRILLAS having existed, like, you know, for such a short time, and just being like this, you know, weird project that he's put on, like, in terms of just like the marketing and the reach of it, is just, in a way, it proves that actually streamer-owned teams might even be like more of a future than a lot of other things, like, because it's so wild, because
the joke is they should just run their own teams, just like they run the core stream, like that topic earlier, because in a way, like, they can generate interest that we can't get, right? Because you're right, if it wasn't ohnePixel, no one would give a fuck about this line of bandits. No one would care. No one would care.
No.
You're right.
And also because, unlike a lot of actual esports teams, Own actually has a business model that works. Like, so for him to just bring more attention to himself, he knows how to convert the attention into money, which a lot of esports teams don't. So in some bizarre way, you know, it does highlight like a really interesting sort of other point. But I mean, I think in a way, if Ona put this team in the European RMR next time or something, I think it would still be, I think people still care about it just because of what it is. And so, you know, I guess you could almost argue that the fact that they try to find a loophole, it would actually be like, it's actually great marketing in a way, just because of the drama that it creates. But yeah, I think
all publicity is good to Anders.
But it is people
no, for sure. By the way, you could even argue they've even done sort of a political tribal thing where it's like you've done a gowl as like us against them. You've made it like, hey, we're rocking with Oni and leave him alone. You've done that shit. In a way, it's only helped his brand. By the way, he hasn't lost anything, of course. No.
For sure, for sure. So I'm sure that this is something that's going to be looked at in the future. Okay. And listen, I'm sure as well for the next year there are going to be some. This is going to be one of the wackiest things next year. Is going to be like what happens in these situations when somebody's going to get kicked from a team.
Sure.
But how like all the Valve ranking points. What happens? How did they decay? There are just a million questions there. So I'm sure it's not the last loophole that we're going to be seeing.
No. By the way, I will also say that's why, in a weird way, Maui, I can sort of see why it would also trigger Richard. Because you have to understand, there's a world where if there's really a sticker, follow my logic, if there's a sticker in the game of ohnePixel's face, we might, even when we watch pro games, have to see ohnePixel's face. It could just be on someone's AK. So that's already intolerable if you're actually a boomer like us and you're not down with the kids. Also, secondly, I actually think this would make Anders laugh so hard. If he saw on this, I think, last episode of Hot Take Point Made, Kassad did probably my favourite boomer moment ever in esports, which is, when you haven't said a word out loud, like it often happens to people who don't speak English fluently. sometimes you've only ever read a word, and because you never said it out loud, you say it out loud, but you fuck up the pronunciation, so you sound silly, don't you? And you realise in the moment, oh shit, because he'd obviously never said this. Kassad just goes, and who's this OhnePixel? And it's like, oh Christ, Kassad, it's ohnePixel for fuck's sake, bro. Like, you sound like the ultimate boomer there. Like you sound like these bloody kids with a fucking mind Fortnite. Like you know what I mean? Like, what are you talking? So anyway, there's that. Which was amazing, though, I have to say, when he said that, mate. I almost thought for a second, is he trolling me, Maui? And then I realised it's Kassad. Kassad's always funny. He's always so real in that. It was just real. It was a real, that wasn't even like a scripted part. He really just thinks it's OhnePixel. Then secondly, I actually think you nailed it in a way, Maui. One of the biggest problems with this is, this doesn't even look plausible that it was like someone did it in good faith. It looks like you cynically did everything in bad faith. Like, first of all, I won't get into this because this would be a massive political thing itself. I think even the angle, because I know a lot of people, you'll probably saw this a lot yourself on social media and forums, a lot of people didn't even understand how are they eligible to play. Like when I look at these country flags, how can they play? Because one of the angles obviously was Hadji is listed in this sense as his dual citizenship with Morocco. Now the problem there is, if you know the history of Counter-Strike, Hadji is associated with France. Now again, I'm not going to get into a whole thing, but that makes people already feel like, oh, so you're using the second identity to get through the door now. So one, it already feels like you don't have a traditional, just a guy not from, like, remember in past teams, this guy, I don't know if he did, but this guy could have been on like a WESG French team, couldn't he, back in the day? I'm not sure if he ever was, I don't think so, but he could have, like, maybe he tried to qualify. So there's that angle, so he didn't even really have an actual Asian player. Then there's the whole secondary angle, which also could be its own thing, but I'll just throw it out there. I actually found it a bit bizarre. I was shocked to find, like, wait a minute. So, like, how do they class Israeli players? Because if people don't know, Israel actually has a problem with that in sports in general. Like if you don't know in Europe, we just tend to count them as European. They get to play in European competitions. So that one I also was a bit bizarre. And like, so how does this work? And then I would just say this aspect. The last thing I would say goes like this. First of all, I think this reminds me of the Astralis drama with Cadian and Bro. People hate when they know you did a bad faith abuse of a substitute rule, because we all know a substitute is intended for the good faith that you actually did want to play that player, but he is unable to play, whether from, like, a visa, travel, health. When someone knows you never ever planned on using him, you were just going to bench him and bring another guy, and that already feels like it's a bit slimy, you know what I mean? Hence why people didn't like the blast angle. But I'd also say this last part, I actually think it's weird, this rule even. I was thinking about this the other day. Maybe I'm the only person who's tried to, like a Greek philosopher, to go down to basic principles. I was thinking about this the other day. Why is there this weird loophole? Because, by the way, if you don't know, guys, the loophole's always existed. It's why famously people said you should just buy, like, fucking whatever, like an Australian player, a person from South America, and then make a European team, because you'd have, like, you could just pick the RMR, cynically, the cheapest. What I don't get is this. So the logic goes like this, guys. The logic goes, because you don't have 3 players, a majority from a region, this is the part I don't get. You can pick any region. Why put the second part in? Why put the... Because here's the problem, right? You're going to think, Thorin, what? You can't control how people make rosters. No, but this will only ever happen to abuse it, because you're needing to have 3 continents, guys. So here's the problem. This isn't like I'm saying no more international teams. There are no international teams that's like South American player, Asian player, Europeans. Like, Even an international team is going to be like Europeans plus one South American, Europeans plus a North American. These teams functionally don't exist except to abuse this loophole. And by the way, because people know you just have to have no majority, people are intentionally making rosters like this. Remember back in the day, there was a Hellraisers lineup that could do the same thing, where they had like Woxic and a few others. And I think theirs was like they had 2 CIS, 2 European, and 1, I don't know, Asia or something like that. I can't remember who they had. But anyway, they had a similar thing where they could pick. So to me, I'd just say this. If I was to close the loophole tomorrow and say, here's the rule, you just have to have 3 players from one region. I'm not really telling you have to be European now, because as far as I know, every other team except this team has 3 from one region. I'm only closing the loophole. I'm not actually stopping any functional real teams competing as far as I can tell. So I feel like this loophole is so specific. It only ever seems to rear its head when someone's intentionally in bad faith abusing it to get an easier RMR. And then lastly, I'll just throw that last part out there. Look, if you want, we can in a second talk about the Richard part if you want. But to me, the worst part about all of this is where you know people just love ohnePixel and hate Richard Lewis. Because what Richard's actually arguing for, guys, is what you guys say you want, which is regional qualifiers that celebrate regional talent. So how the fuck would someone going with 0 Asian players and qualify from the Asian qualifier? Which think about earlier in this convo, everyone does those convos. Wow, an event in Asia, will this spur people to play the game? Oh my God, people like Kays, they've been on the rise in the CSGO, they get to go to a major. Well, all that's nothing if we just let everyone abuse these rules. In fact, I'll go one further. If you don't think these rules are bad, like you think it should still exist, and you think it's fine to exploit them, people actually are fucking up right now, mate. When you think how much sticker money there is, someone should really cynically make a roster with like JKS plus Keserato plus 3 European. Like you could then just go to the shittest RMR and instant qualify, get all the sticker money. But I think surely everyone could agree with me that would be a net negative for the space and the bloody Asian community. Like they don't get to have that team, do they? So to me, I do agree. This is like a storm in a teacup. It wasn't that big a deal, especially because they didn't qualify. But I do think it is essential we get rid of this loophole. Because like I said, I can't think of any time it's ever been legit used that wasn't like someone knew this rule and reverse engineered a roster that could just go anywhere. I don't get it.
I've got an angle that's going to accomplish like 2 things. One, it's going to bring up like a historical element. I know you appreciate that, Duncan. And it's also going to allow me to ingratiate myself with owners community so that I can, you know, he can hire me as a streamer.
I know it's the whole show in many ways has been an advert for Anders to be hired as the caster of ohnePixel stream in some ways. Yeah,
that's exactly right. So on the one hand, back when I think it was either the C-Set 75 or the Krieg, but one of these 2 weapons at one point, you know, like obviously at both different points in history, they've both been massively overpowered to the point where it was obvious in the community and for every pro player ever that these guns just had to change. And whenever we would meet at the majors with Valve, every player would step up and talk to Valve, and they would say, "Guys, what on earth is going on?" Like you can tell it's not a question of like let's look at the data. It's a question of like just look at the game and see that like it's obviously ridiculous, you know. But Valve would always make this point and say, if it is that overpowered, then... Because what the teams would do, and it is actually an interesting thing to think about, what the teams would do is they would make almost like a gentleman's agreement to use some of these guns. I think in the beginning with the Krieg, people were like, it almost is like uncool to use it. Obviously, at some point, like new players came along and they said, no, I'm going to be the Krieg person. But a lot of the like slightly older pros kind of like shied away from it because it was like an ungentlemanly, like it was too good. You know, like people were like, no, we don't want to use these. And what Valve pointed out is that if people don't almost exploit the game to the max, we can't necessarily tell.
Oh, they actually want you to do it, right? I see.
Yes,
right.
Like we actually want you to like. So if some weapon becomes like completely, you know, just takes over the entire game, then in a couple of weeks, Valve will look at the data and they will say, well, obviously this is really like, you know, every single game. Like there was the one famous highlight is like the one tournament where like I think ohneMeister had more Tech 9 kills than
it was kind of into 2015, yeah.
Yeah. So like if something like that happens, right, then you know. But if ohneMeister is too kind and says like, well, I'm gonna be cool about it, I'm not gonna use it, then he's actually delaying the point in time where that happens. So ohnePixel, all he really did was like, you know, he showed us, he was gracious enough to show us that it looked like
he led the way. He's the Messiah in many ways. Yeah, true. Okay.
That's what I'm saying. That was my point.
He was the prophet that could see the future, Maui, and he understood that because of his prescience, he understood there was a greater tragedy coming in the future where someone would exploit these rules and get into a major. So what he did is he sacrificed his drillers, his main men, to not make it through this RMR, just to close up. You know, it's like the end of Stranger Things. You had to like close the gap in the fucking rift or whatever. Yeah, to stop the evil shit.
In that case, we should just put his sticker in just
Why not?
as a remembrance of his testament that he's made. Wow. Yeah.
I think logically we should just put one pixel in the game. It should be a pistol. It's called the 1 pixel pistol. Kassad can do the artwork, and it's just the ohnePixel gun. There you go.
The concept of Kassad artwork.
And obviously the joke would be, I fucked up the joke, didn't I? The joke would be, it's available to both teams. In fact, all teams. You can just choose when to use it. In fact, even spectators can equip it. That would be just to make the scenario ridiculous like this. I don't like it. Whatever, anyway. Just all those coaches hiding in the heavens watching us all from their secret cams. They can also have a gun too while they're doing it. Whatever.
Well, that was an Observer bug reference.
Observer bug, shout out to everyone who abused the Observer. Yeah, in many ways, actually all those coaches also who abused that Observer bug, they helped get that fixed. So in many ways, who was the real perpetrator? Weren't they actually the ones fixing the problem?
Thank you, Zoner.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, thank you to Zoner and Raging and run down the list.
Ironically, I've created a moral loophole myself.
I know. Right, for the last point of the show, luckily this is what everyone can join in on, because I've purposely picked this for ugly, because I actually think, even though you're all going to, when you hear the topic, think, wow, this be ugly, this is like good or bad, surely. This has to be ugly if you think of the framing. So, you know, very recently, one of the absolute, like, we're talking like f0rest ballot, we're talking like one of the 5 most famous and greatest players in Counter-Strike history, f0rest, officially retired. Here's why it's in ugly, because as far as I can tell, it wasn't willing. Like, if you don't know, guys, one of the reasons this guy for real did play all those billion qualifiers with Boomer, Stream Demons or whatever, and would keep streaming constantly and kept his level up and did say, like in my reflections a few years ago, I'd still like to have a crack at tier 1, or, you know, if you put me on like a phase or something, I could perform. Here's the sad thing. I get it, right, when someone was a great player, but they were just like, a great player. They were one of like 500 people who were really good. The idea that you could actually be like a GOAT and you're still pushed out the door when you still wanted to play at the end, that is so alien to me coming from a sports background. Like, I get maybe why he wouldn't literally be recruited to FaZe, but the idea f0rest can't be on like OG or this NIP or Fnatic. Why? I mean, by the way, Crims is still on Fnatic, and I'd argue f0rest could be better than Crims. You know what I mean? Like, that's the part I don't get. It's like, I feel like it's such an unceremonious way. Because like I say, I want f0rest to retire for real, like a true great sportsman. Like, hey guys, this is going to be my last season. Thank you for everything. Like, let's celebrate it. I'm ready to move on. You're ready. This isn't the case, as far as I can tell. Remember, the guy is only like, isn't he like 36 or something? Right? As far as I know, like, he could probably and would probably choose to play for 1 or 2 more years, or maybe he wanted one last run at it, you know, like one last crack at a playoff or something to get the out of his system. It just feels a bit kind of whack that like our GOATs, like, it ends badly for them like that too. Because I'll throw this in as a last thing as well. I also don't think it's like the normal thing like sports, like you just can't play the game anymore. That wasn't true. It wasn't. As far as I can tell, one of the real things f0rest is a victim of is that everyone is obsessed with the idea that the next player you want to recruit is 17. They don't ever want it to be. Even though what I always say is weird is, we're not making rosters for 10 years, guys. You might only have this roster for a year, so surely f0rest can do his job. You know, he could do this role. Yeah. So I just thought, again, you think of all the great players in history in sports, it's kind of a bit whack, the idea that you're almost like forced to retire. It wasn't really your choice. And then even though we give you all the flowers and we give you all the great moments, I hope people make frag movies and all that jazz. But again, I'd like it to have been in like a structured way where it's like, you know, guys, this is my last year after this last major. Let's agree however far I go, you know, we're going to... That's the way you want to see Neo and fucking Markelov and f0rest and like the absolute GOATs go out. Because again, these aren't even just normal players. These are players that are comparable to like a Michael Jordan, a LeBron James. Like, those people should absolutely get their own flowers. And to some degree, you know, the saying in sports, they should be allowed to write their own ticket, as it were, like how it ends. They should get some say in it, I think. What do you think, Anders? You obviously have a connection with this guy.
Yeah, I think it's probably really hard to fully do like a real, like a full view on like the kind of impact that f0rest had on the game, right? Like, just to put it into context, like for me, when I started working with like NIP, with the whole NIP TV back in the day, it was such an intimidating feeling for me to meet these guys the first time. Like, for me to meet Get Right and f0rest and Exist, and I knew less about Fiflaren and Freiburg just because they came from Source, and I just knew less about that game. But for me, like, running into these people was like it like really like a celebrity kind of moment for me. Like, I grew up watching these people play Counter-Strike 1.6 and even earlier than that. So for me, it was like, it was really surreal. So just to say that, like, that was the level before anyone even really played CSGO, right? And then they built on like all the story that most people watching is probably recognize, which is, you know, the 87-0 type stuff and finally winning a major. All like, it's just to say that there's just such an absurd impact on the game and on so many people's lives, like probably more than we can ever really like, you know, sum up. So I agree, like there is the like to try to find a normal landing for that is probably in itself like super hard, but I agree to some extent, like it does suck a little bit. And the other thing that I think we're rediscovering this fact now about older players, which is that sure, you can probably find, you know, a 17-year-old that has like a much sicker aim and that also is willing to commit like, you know, 11 or 12 hours a day to optimizing like every single thing. But sometimes the thing you really can't get is the kind of person that can perform really well in like the semi-final of a tournament that's on land that has like the insane cool to have like.
Dude, the obvious example, because I'm thinking of the match I watched yesterday, is Rain. Rain still does that now, Anders. Like, no one can beat this guy's experience. Still, when he wants to play and he's on his game, he's a fucking stud still, mate. Yeah,
and you're just never gonna get him out of his comfort zone, right? Like it doesn't matter like what the situation is on that day. You put him in front of a crowd, in front of like a a really big stage where like every single thing matters. Like these people are just like they're just rock solid in that sense. And the 17-year-old that you hired, like he can get there one day, like that's fine. But it is a massive dice roll in the beginning.
Yes,
and that's like on some level, I think the kind of quality that someone like f0rest would have is. It is being undervalued in that sense. I totally agree. I don't know enough about sports about how it's done, but I mean, like I have the same feeling. Like I wish that there was more of a way to honor like everything that someone like f0rest has done for the game. Like I wish there was like some way to do it that was bigger or more like like that. Like maybe that can still happen. I'm not saying it's like too late or anything, but I'm just saying like I sort of share that same emotion that. I think he just deserves like more of a send off in some way and more of like more things in that. Like I totally agree. So
what do you think, Maui?
Yeah, I mean, I felt like that was pretty good and conclusive, but I feel like with the way that it happened and what f0rest said about it, and I just feel like I wish he was just given an opportunity in like the tier 2 space or took one. I feel like that was what was confusing for me about it.
Would you agree with me? In a weird way, I'd almost rather he was still playing, like you say, like tier 2, but then I actually saw him fail and I was like, right, now it's fine for him to go. You know, if he just doesn't have it anymore. Like with Kenny S, like, at the end, Kenny S didn't give a fuck and he just wasn't that good. Like, then I'm okay with you moving on. The problem here is he himself's probably haunted by like, could I still have had one last run or something, or one last year or something, right?
Yeah, I think a team like OG would have been a perfect fit, or like you said, NIP. I feel like there's a lot of those teams that have, I would say, tier 1 resources, but you don't even need to give him like a crazy contract. Maybe, like I don't know if he priced himself out or anything like that. That's why it's sometimes hard to comment on things like this because I don't know necessarily was he asking for like 8K a month or something, because I don't think he merited that based off of anything recent. But if he was a bit more willing to, and I assume he would have tried lowering his price to a number that would have fit some teams. But if teams like Gamer Legion, are overlooking him completely, like that's the thing that a team like that needs right now. If like Gamer Legion's looking pretty bad in this RMR, I feel like they actually do need a veteran presence. Like for their longest, like oldest guy to be Volt, like are you kidding me? Like that's not really going to instill anybody with confidence. But if you got f0rest next to you, I feel like there's so much value in that. And I always have said that the proper roster construction is generally 2 older veteran players and 3 younger ones. But if you really want to min-max, it could just be the 1 veteran player. But with no veteran presence, I just think some of these teams are looking really clueless and kind of like they don't really have an identity either. They're just kind of going through the strat roulette of meta starters and meta finishers, and they don't really know what they're trying to feel throughout the game. So I think someone like that would be a calming presence that would also bring better communication. I think that's also incredibly underrated. So I don't really see why he couldn't have found some home somewhere at any point, unless he just priced himself out. And I don't really want to believe that he priced himself out. I think I have a slightly more cynical angle of organizations and how they just want to look for the next up and coming talent, because we kind of like f0rest is a known quantity. Like we know I would say he's a fairly known quantity. Like we know that he's probably not going to peak at like a top 20 player in the world, but could he be a top 50 player in the world again if he's in the right environment? I thought that was always possible. So yeah, it's such a weirdly unceremonious ending for one of the greatest careers that we've ever had in Counter-Strike, period.
By the way, I also do agree, to tie together your points. That is something I've also come to the conclusion of. It's not that there aren't talented rookies who could be really good, but you're also gambling if you have 5 of them or 4 of them. Because if you think about it, like what Anders said, all we need now is one of them to have those stage issues or have a moment where they're not experienced, and suddenly the team can be fucked. Whereas if you have like 2 or 3 young stars and they perform, but then you have like a Rain or a f0rest and then they're going to be fairly rock solid, you're actually just sort of like making the team make more sense in the long run. Also, by the way, one thing I'll touch on finally is because Anders brought up that thing of like when you meet these people don't realise there's a certain aspect where you can't like fake the funk. Like Maui will know this reference. You know when they did this recent thing, Maui, where they did the top 75 NBA players of all time, and they brought together all these really truly great players, even people from the 60s and the 70s, you know, really old guys. And what they did is they put them all in a room, Anders, and they had like a thing where they did like a ceremony, you know, where they introduced you, but they also had them just in a room doing like, you know, like a mixer where they could all meet and talk. And the cool thing was, this is one of the coolest things, you would get stuff like today's stars fanboying over like Michael Jordan, but then the joke was Michael Jordan would be fanboying over some guy from the 70s, and it was like a mutual appreciation society. But here's the cool thing, Maui probably heard this story, which is that all the modern stars say that like, look, everyone in that room's a legend, or like Hall of Famer, but they said the difference is when Michael Jordan walked in the room, it's like everyone's head turned. It's like even Michael Jordan among those stars was like on another tier, like up here, where like even like his rivals and everyone before and after him was like, holy shit, that's Michael Jordan, right? That is the tier f0rest is in, guys. It's not just to fans. If you go to an event, it's a small hand group of people, but if you take people like Neo, for like the absolute goats, even the other players are looking at them differently. Even the vibe when they speak up is so different. It's like everyone can sense these guys are like special, you know.
Yeah, and I think you obviously for obvious reasons, you really truly mentioned the other person who's probably like Neo is the other person in that conversation, right? Like it's for people who don't know, I mean, I don't know if it's easy to get like a real feeling for what those guys were doing in Counter-Strike 1.6, but they've absolutely redefined what it means to be like at the top of the top. It's crazy. It's really crazy. I was trying to think. I had another point that was related to this.
Well, I just think that it's important for our scene to celebrate people that have paved the way in all aspects. I just think that's something where people aren't really as grateful for what came before them as they should be in all aspects of life, but especially esports where it's such a Zoomer generation. Oh, sure. And especially these kids that are getting paid like $30,000 a month now to play this game on like a top 10 team in the world. Like this wouldn't be possible without people like f0rest. And in a lot of ways, people with like f0rest that have such continuity in this space also created such great narratives that we were able to hold on to as fans, pundits alike, which helped further this space. Like if f0rest just decided after a couple of years of not making a ton of money that he said, I'm gonna leave to get a tech job or something like that, well, we wouldn't, then that whole NIP story wouldn't exist. And there's an honest to God chance that if in CSGO in the beginning NIP wasn't there, yeah, like there were some teams that were competing, but without that string of dominance, that was something that a lot of people could latch on to, and it helped elevate the sport so tremendously.
This was going to be my point. I think people really don't understand. There was a really good chance in the beginning of CSGO that if the wrong sort of 5 to 7 people just stopped playing, then it would have been almost like a domino effect of like, well, then who even cares anymore?
Yeah,
because, like,
exactly.
You know, like these people just were the entire brand of the game for those of us who care about the esports side of it in some sense. And here's something else that like in the beginning wasn't like a known thing. And in a way, I'm so grateful that this turned out to be the case. I hope it continues to be the case, but it's so cool now that we have people like Sonic or Exist now who can sort of like, there's still a place for you if you want to be part of it. Whereas there was a real chance for a moment there where it was like, well, if you're no longer going to be like a top player, then you just get to leave and go, and like that's it. We're never seeing you again. Like those positions didn't necessarily exist in the past. So I think now he's like a brand ambassador or something for NIP, but like in a way, like it does warm my heart whenever I see Exist at like events. I'm always so happy to see that, like, you know, he's still like committed to the game. He's still doing all these things. Like his legacy kind of gets to live on because of all the stuff that he's doing, right? And someone like Sonic as well, the same kind of thing, right? So like I think I take that as a good sign for the space as a whole. If people can go on to have careers even after they decide to sort of hang up the mouse and all the rest of it like that, that should be the case, I think, if they want to, obviously.
Also, I'll just put this out there. look, if we're talking just generically about old players that were great and aren't as great anymore, have been out the game for years. Look, again, most people, the normal rules would apply. Yeah, of course I'd get the active player now. Of course I'd get the guy who's proving it today. Of course I'd get the guy where I don't have to hope he shows me form from 4 years ago. The difference is f0rest would be an outlier even in that discussion, though. Like, this is one thing I always make the point of. Funny enough, he's at the RMR now about my boy Oscar on Sinners. Oscar also never just became bad and was forced out the city. He chose to go to tier 2 and stay home with his family and just play with a Czech team instead of an international team. Like, these guys have just shown longevity that doesn't exist for normal people. They are the outliers. Like, if people don't realise, I think f0rest won his first, like, reasonable size tournament in 2005, and at the end of the day, he was still fine in that Dignitas lineup. He wasn't even that bad at that point. Like, so if you're like, realistically, we're not even talking about like, wow, like 10 years. We're talking like 15 plus years of like being a top 30 player in the world. Again, like Maui says, do I think he would be top 20? No, of course not. But he could be like the 37th best player. And if you can just run the maths on teams, 5 players per 50 just to get fucking top 10. Like, surely he can play in a top 20 team logically by that logic. Again, and we're even saying, it doesn't even have to be bloody f0rest. He can just be a role player, can't he? I've even always thought, by the way, the last thing I'll say on this is as well, the reason why I also pick f0rest is not only is he the ultimate like amazing legacy, so you can have his brand associated with yours, you've got all that history, everyone loves him. The last thing I'll throw out there is, I also feel like if you look at the role he has always wanted to play on T-side in fucking CS, you can absolutely do that as a boomer. That's not even necessarily what all the stars want to play, like that kind of aggressive rifle now. Like, you just like Rain, I think that's another reason, by the way, why Rain keeps his career. No one really wants to do that role, bro. It's a role that can be fucking tough, and it requires like fucking just getting killed sometimes. f0rest would also probably be pretty good at that. He's also, by the way, of all the superstars ever, has one of the smallest egos. Like, I always tell people, don't go too far. It's not really like the interviews. One thing that I'll tell you, in fact, I'll tell you one last thing. I'll end on a cool little detail. One thing that is dope about f0rest is he just keeps it off camera. I can tell you, I've seen this guy be quite angry when he lost a final he thought he should have won. Or, you know, he played badly himself on the last round and lost like a map. He doesn't really go back like, hey guys, I'm cool, and hey, get right, stop being so serious. He's himself pissed off, like, what the fuck, like, I'm better than them. But so he had the competitive fire, but he never went too far the other way. He was never doing simple-esque shit and getting people caked or being a dickhead to them. Like, he actually did keep his ego in check. So I also believe, I feel like he'd be a fairly, like, easy person to insert into the mix of a team environment as well. He's not going to come in and go, hey, he's not going to do what, I won't name names, but I can imagine some modern day stars might still imagine it's 2017 and demand all the star roles. He's not going to do that. He would just come along and just do his job as a journeyman, I believe. So I actually think he would even fit that Rain Crim sort of longevity filler role in the team approach. It wouldn't even be an issue. So we're not saying he has to be f0rest and try and be the 17th best player in the world or something like that. That's not, even he would know that, guys. Come on.
Yeah.